Spring 2014 was a slow season for my father's business. The weather is nice and the roads are clear, which means slow shifts at an auto shop. It was mid-April, around 4 p.m. The wind was pulling in a nice spring breeze when my dad, Bill, was walking along the side of his shop. It happened to overlook a small stream and running trail, which he enjoyed gazing at near the end of his shift. The side of his building ran along the top of a steep hill, which turned into a path. We heard a ruffling in the wind, and about halfway down the hill, he sees a big blue tarp. Being very proud of his business and its appearance, he starts to climb down the hill. He was just about to grab for it, about 15 feet away, to toss it in the dump, when he saw a car pull into the lot. He turned around and went to help his customer. When 5:30 p.m. rolls around, he closes up and goes home, forgetting the tarp. The next afternoon, Bill is sitting in his office when 3 policemen came in. They asked my father and co-worker a bunch of questions about any suspicious behavior they might have seen. Side note, my dad is extremely charismatic and friendly. He oftentimes talks people into sharing information with him that they really shouldn't. He looks like someone you can trust, and you can, and he seemed to always have the insider details about things like this. He used his humor to make people feel comfortable, which helped getting strangers to open up to him. Anyway, Bill and his co-worker Hank are speaking with a female police officer when she lets it slip that a body has been discovered just down the hill. "Oh crap, I was down there yesterday cleaning. I didn't see any body though," Bill said. "Around what time? Did you happen to see a large blue and white tarp while you were cleaning the area?" she asked intensely. Actually, yeah. I almost grabbed it yesterday but ended up getting distracted." She asked him more questions about what time and what he saw. When he asked her if the body was found in the tarp, "Yes, it was. A woman jogging found it this morning at 10:30 a.m. My dad was floored. He was there just yesterday. And after a few more questions, the police all head to the crime scene to finish the initial investigation. No one was allowed on the scene, and the police were asking that passers-by not take pictures. Flash forward a few days. The police went back to my father's shop. They noticed the security cameras set around the building, and they were hoping that they might have caught something on tape. While transferring the data over, my dad started asking more questions about the murder. He learned it was a middle-aged man that had been stabbed to death. Not too much to go on as it seemed. "Hey, you know there are a couple of meth heads that live in the shack behind our shop. It's connected to the bar?" Bill started talking about his own predictions for who had done it. He continued, "Yeah, we have a lot of problems with them, stealing scrap metal from the back, letting their dogs run wild. Even had them threaten to shoot me once, and I saw them spraying their dogs with water to quit barking. You should check them out." The officer nodded, gathered the rest of his things and left. "Hey, Hank, let's go down there, see if we can find anything cool," my father whispered to his co-worker. All right, I guess. It couldn't do any harm," Hank replied hesitantly. They started down the hill where the trench was found. The grass was flat, and the tarp was now gone. They walked around for 15 minutes or so when Bill headed up the stream a little ways. The trail runs under a main road and then leads to a man-made lake. Just under the bridge, the water starts to get heavier and the trees are a bit thicker. He noticed a red Lowe's cart on one of the trees. "I'm taking that to the shop," he thought, as he ran over to pull it out the stream. Calling over Hank for help, the two of them fish it out and start wheeling it back up the hill. Suddenly, my dad stops. he sees something on the cart. What is that rusty-looking stuff? Hank stops, looking at the cart. Is that blood? They looked closer, and sure enough, blood was all over the cart. On the handle, on the wheels, and the side. But it wasn't only blood. They started to notice hair. Human hair. Utterly stunned, my dad calls the policewoman he had been talking to the previous day and explained what they found. For whatever reason, the police department were very skeptical that this was evidence. At first, they didn't even believe my father. When he told them it made no sense to make it up, they sent out a car. There were 2 police officers and a CSI. The CSI asked my dad why he thought it was blood. It looks like blood, sir. I'm not sure. How do you know that it's human hair? The CSI asked. Because it looks like human hair? My dad said sarcastically. Why did he seem so hesitant? They used a chemical test, and sure enough, it tested positive for human blood. They took the cart as evidence and thanked my dad. Again, my dad tried to give his opinion on who the mystery killer might be. He suggested again that they speak to the crazy neighbors behind his auto shop. Still, no information was taken down, and they left with what they had. 2 days pass. My dad is leaving the shop to get some things from Costco. There is a small dirty alley that leads to the main road just behind his work. In the past, it had been blocked by one of the meth addicts' cars. They were complaining to my dad and his boss about the business driving cars back and forth through the alley, disrupting them. He notices it's open and decides to take the shortcut to his destination. But something was off. He saw the usual blocked car sitting in front of the shack. The door was wide open, and there was someone sitting on their knees with their upper body inside the car. He got in his car and crept up, just a little, so he could see what was happening. He right away recognized the skinny red-headed woman as the female that lived in the shack. It was the shack guy's wife/girlfriend. He didn't know exactly. She was on her hands and knees surrounded by hard chemicals, bleach, Comet, OxyClean, and much more. My dad had said that he knew right then that they were guilty. For one, why would someone be scrubbing their car with straight chemicals? No water, no rinsing. It was in the middle of the day on a hot June afternoon. Second, they happened to be only 2 blocks away from a local car wash. He said it felt off, and he knew to trust his instincts. She kept scrubbing and scrubbing the passenger side floor, and he pulled out his phone and started recording her. Now, he's known this woman and her significant other for a few years now. Like I said, they complained about my father's workers, and he complained about their dogs on and off for a while. It was all harmless bickering. My dad, always trying to be the funny guy, yells out his window as he's driving past. Covering up for a murder? He laughed and drove away, hearing her say something explicit as he drove off. This time when he called the police, they took it very seriously. He explained that she was cleaning the car aggressively, and that it seemed like she was trying to bleach something out the car. The next day, when the police department went to talk with the residents of the shack, the day after that, they made an arrest. After searching the shack, they found a large blood stain soaked into the plywood floor. Once the blood was seen, the wife or girlfriend crumbled and told the police everything. It was her husband/boyfriend, and the victim. The victim was named Rich. He had gone over to the house to shoot up and get high. Someone ended up accusing Rich of putting some of the dope aside for himself, and things got heated. Eventually, the husband started to physically fight with Rich when he stabbed him. He bled out on the floor and died. They didn't know what to do, so they stole the Lowe's cart to move him around, loaded him in the car, wrapped him up in the tarp, and pushed his body down the hill. They ditched the cart, thinking the river would wash it down far enough that it wouldn't be found. My dad and Hank sat in the car while they watched the police arrest Don, the suspected murderer. He took a video of that as well. And my dad actually said, "Ha! Killer," in the video. My dad says that he's going to start a PI business because he solved a murder on his own. Yeah, right, Dad. I thought I would share with you about my life as a VBSS operator on board the USS Gary. Basically, a VBSS team is a part-time volunteer job within the US Navy. It stands for Visit, Board, Search, and Seizure. And as the name states, we visit enemy ships, board them, search them, and seize them of all suspicious activity. We mainly focus on counter-piracy/smuggling. However, we do conduct other missions, such as hostage rescue and other things that should be remained classified. The job is a part-time job, one you do on the side while you have your main job on board the ship. However, I was one of the few that solely did VBSS. Well, let me correct that. I had another job. I was an undesignated seaman. However, I carried out duties on that job maybe one day a week. I will try and tell you some weird and creepy things that happened during my time in the Navy, while still staying inside the limits of information I'm allowed to tell. Keep in mind these stories are few and far between, and most of our missions consisted of arriving at boats and arresting innocent guys who were just at the wrong place at the wrong time. The first one I'm going to share with you was about 5 years ago. We got a call that a boat had been spotted about a half-mile out from the ship, and we were to get geared up. As VBSS, our gear consists of an M4 assault rifle, a Sig Sauer P226 handgun, a combat knife, 3 mags of ammo, and a helmet. We got geared up and entered our rubber riding craft. I remember specifically on this day, I had a terrible headache, and focusing was very hard for me. I remember my petty officer looked over at me as we were closing in on the boat, and said I looked like I was taking it up the arse. As we got up to the boat, we saw 4 men, unarmed, and they looked to be about 50 years old. After realizing they weren't a threat, we just handcuffed them, and my teammate asked them what they were doing this far out at sea. The man responded that they were running from the Powerful One. We didn't know what the hell they were talking about, so when we asked them for further information, one of them said they were just on a fishing trip yesterday off the coast, and a fog came over them, and the Powerful One teleported them here. Okay. Well, there was no way they could have gone from a few miles off the coast to 500 miles out at sea in a day. The men looked visibly shaken, and one of them even had a fresh gash down the back that he claimed was caused by the Powerful One. I don't know if they were crazy or something is actually out there, but either way, it gave us a good scare. The next story was about 2 years ago. This story still gives me goosebumps to this day, because it was one of the very few actual gunfights I have been in. I'm not talking about a few warning shots or injury shots, I mean a fully fledged firefight between us and the enemy. Every combat veteran knows what I'm talking about when I say there are no atheists in a gunfight. But anyway, we received a call that armed pirates were spotted a mile off from the ship, smuggling unknown bagged contents, and that we needed to take them into custody. Even though they were armed, none of us expected to get into a firefight because we came across armed men all the time, and most of them just ditched their guns into the ocean to rid themselves of evidence, which is a smart move if you ask me. However, these men didn't. As soon as we zeroed in on their craft, we received immediate enemy fire. As experienced operators, I can officially say we all crapped ourselves. Yes, a normal gunfight is scary, but in the middle of the ocean, on a motorized watercraft with no protective walls, you are basically a sitting duck. We all flat-bellied, just waiting for our craft to get penetrated with a bullet for us to sink. One of my teammates got up in a kneel position and returned fire. And when he did, I guess it struck a bit of bravery in all of us as we did the same. As VBSS operators, we are taught to shoot to wound, never to kill, because our job is not to kill. Our job is to capture and allow higher-ups to gather intel from interrogation. There were 10 gunmen on the enemy boat, and 13 of us. I remember I got one of the pirates in the knee. One of my teammates, and still good friends to this day, Henry, got hit in the thigh, and couldn't do anything for about 6 months. Eventually we couldn't hold any longer, and a helicopter was called in and they got gunned down. Thankfully no one died, but it was still a frightening and terrifying experience. This story is probably one of the more creepy and bone-chilling ones on the list, just due to the fact there was no rational explanation for it. Like normal, we got a call that there was a suspicious vessel and that we needed to check it out. This was different though, because we were working with a cargo ship. Working with big ships is always scary, because of all that can go wrong, and you always have that feeling that there was some place you missed or didn't check. Since the hull of this ship was elevated, we had to be helicoptered in, so we got loaded up and got into the helicopter. It was about a 20-minute ride out to where the ship was, and when we got to it, we fast roped out on deck. There wasn't anyone on the top deck, which we found weird, especially for a ship of this size and this far out at sea. After conducting search protocol for a good half hour on the top deck and bridge and finding absolutely no one, we assumed that maybe they had caught our ship on their radar system and went to hide under deck. We went down below, and to make a long story short, we didn't find anyone there either. The entire team was baffled. There was absolutely no way a ship around 600 miles out in the Atlantic could have gotten there unmanned. We started looking inside large freight crates and still found nothing. No one knew how this was possible. And then our lieutenant called us over to come to look at something that he had found. There was a piece of paper, and very poorly etched into the paper was the words, "Help us." This freaked us out. I'm not sure what exactly happened to the ship after we left, but I couldn't get off it quick enough. I remember that night, I sat in my room contemplating quitting. It's the only time I have ever truly considered it. As VBSS operators, we are taught that when conducting a search, to never have your weapon safety on until right before you engage an enemy. You will see where I'm going with this in a second. This story isn't very long, nor is it very shocking, but I thought it was interesting enough to share. We were conducting an op on a small fishing vessel, and the way it was set up was me and my buddy were going to board first while the others waited for us to clear it out. Now that I think about it, it was a stupid move, because if there had been 10 armed pirates on the boat, we would have been dead. But nonetheless, we did as we were told. We had boarded, and I was covering my buddy's 6 while we were about to turn into a doorway leading into the bridge. When we were about 10 feet from the door, a man all of a sudden bolts from around the corner, and it terrified us. My buddy had his safety off and accidentally pulled the trigger, and got the dude right in the head. Man, was that a shit show. The Navy had to pay quite a bit to the family, and my buddy ended up getting court-martialed. He ended up not getting discharged and got to return to active duty. But still, it was a damn mess. This is one of the more creepy ones, and was actually pretty recent. Like how most of these stories start, we got a call saying there was an unidentified craft close by. When we arrived to the boat, there were 6 men on it. We went through procedure, yelling with our guns pointed. Basically the Navy's way of letting enemies know our dick is bigger. And when they were contained, Petty Officer asked them what they were doing. One of them came forward and said how they were heading out to an oil rig, but ended up getting tailed by a North Korean submarine and that they were being followed. They said they had seen the big flag painted on the side of the bridge and everything. We thought nothing of it because we knew North Korea carried out very few naval operations, and when they did, it was never outside their own waters in very small submarines not capable of locking onto any object. We were out in the middle of the Atlantic, and after taking the men on board the Gary, our rear admiral told us that they had picked up a submarine of quite substantial size on their radar. However, it disappeared before they could do anything. He told us it was unlike anything they had seen before, because a submarine of that size could not go stealth like that. It really makes you wonder, what if North Korea is capable of more than we think? Who knows what secrets they're keeping hidden over there? As I've stated before, the life of a VBSS operator is never easy, and if you're wanting to do this job, I suggest you prepare yourselves for the best way you can. In some way, I would say it's even harder than what Marines and soldiers have to do. I'm in no way disrespecting the incredibly hard stuff they have to go through. However, in the VBSS world, the ocean can make things a lot more difficult. This story I'm about to tell you happened around 4 years ago, when I was still pretty new to the Navy. Just like most of these stories start out, the commanding officer of the Gary told us a pirate vessel had been spotted not too far from our ship. He told us this call was not like any other call though. He told us they could have a potential hostage with them, and could be hostile. Now normally when this happens, they usually call in more experienced and better trained men, like Navy SEALs and Marine Maritime Raid Forces. But for whatever reason, they deemed us able to carry out the mission. We were all ready, however every one of us would be lying if we said we weren't secretly shitting ourselves. Especially me, still being considered the new guy on the team. We got geared up and headed out as soon as we could. Hostage situations are always more intense due to the fact that someone's life is at stake, and it is a no-fail mission. We had a helicopter escort with an .50 cal door gun locked and loaded on overwatch in case stuff went south. It took us about 7 minutes to arrive to the vessel, and as soon as we got there we immediately started taking action. We began pointing our guns at the armed men on the boat, screaming your typical orders like, "Get down," or "Hands above your head." You'd be surprised how much we sound like police officers at times. We all expected them to either return fire or resist. However, they didn't. They didn't follow our orders, but they put their guns down and just stood there looking at us. We were all weirded out by this, but we did not let this opportunity go. We rushed the deck, detained every man we could find, and went to receive the package, military slang for rescue the hostage. We found her below deck. She looked to be around 19, African ethnicity, and beaten up pretty badly. We immediately got her on our craft and started speeding back to the USS Gary as quickly as we could. She started mumbling an inaudible message, but we pretty quickly made out the words, "Watch out." It was at that very moment we heard the helicopters, .50 cal, start unloading behind us. When we were getting back to the ship and spoke to the helicopter pilots, they told us that as we were heading back, a hidden man had crept up from below deck and was aiming an RPG at our craft. Needless to say, that scared the crap out of all of us, and I still say to this day, if it had not been for whoever was manning that door gun, me and my teammates would not be alive today. The next story is on the creepier side. It will definitely make you wonder. It was about 1.5 years ago. We get a call, pirates spotted. Everything is normal. We suit up, head out with a helicopter escorting us to provide information back to the galley, and we arrive to the boat the pirates were on. However, upon further inspection, we realize that there is no one on the boat. All of us are baffled, and when we radio up the chopper to ask what the hell is up, he says he had eyes on them, looked away for a second, and when he looked back they were all gone like they had never been there. The helicopter usually arrives a few minutes before we do, so he can scout the area out, and he swore that when he arrived they were on the boat, and seconds before he looked away and they were gone. No one can explain what happened to this day, and we never found out what happened to the men who were on that boat. This next story takes place around 1 year ago. Being a specialized group in the US Navy, sometimes as VBSS operators, we get to work with Navy SEALs. However, it is extremely rare, and when we do, it's usually just a training exercise. But this time was different. It was the real deal. We never take these opportunities lightly, and are always 100% serious, due to the fact that these guys are amazing at what they do. Let me tell you, if you ever get a chance to do anything with a Navy SEAL, take that opportunity. They are some of the most class guys I have and ever will meet. Not to mention how amazingly trained and highly skilled operators they are. This particular call was to attach to a SEAL unit and conduct a close quarters raid on an undocumented whaling ship with armed crew members that was holding something the Navy wanted. We weren't allowed to know what they were looking for, and to this day, I still don't know exactly what the SEALs were supposed to be looking for, but we carried out our job regardless. Now our job was to basically be at the SEALs' backs and aid them in anything they needed while they did the dirty work. We all got geared up and began our operation. The SEALs arrived via helicopter assertion, and we did our usual watercraft approach. There were 20 of the VBSS men, including myself and about 8 SEALs. We climbed up the side of the hull and entered the deck using a grapple ladder, and just to give you guys a peek at how amazing the SEALs are, there were probably about 15 armed men on the deck alone, and in the short 30 seconds it took us to get there, the 8 Navy SEALs had already detained every single one of them and were on their way below deck. We kept watch on deck while the SEALs were conducting their mission. We were up there and just waited for a good hour, and all of a sudden, the SEALs come bursting out the door that leads below deck, holding something that looks to be a body bag. Whoever or whatever was in that bag was squirming violently and making inhuman noises. When we arrived back at the galley, we were immediately led to a room on the ship that I had never seen before or since, and firmly instructed to never speak about what we saw to anyone. I very well may be stepping out of line telling this story, but I think the public needs to know that there is a lot, and I mean a lot of things the military and government are hiding from you. This next story is kind of weird because it was kind of creepy, but at the same time was just very odd. I was sitting in my room during my rest period with a few other guys on the VBSS team, listening to Nickelback. I know, we have awful taste in music, but the way the particular song was playing, How You Remind Me, not that it's important, but it's a great song, you should listen to it, and just talking about random stuff. All of a sudden, our lieutenant bursts through the door and tells us to get suited up, because there were 3 pirate crafts pursuing the ship. We sprung to our feet and immediately met up with the rest of the team on deck. We were not going to be leaving the deck, which was relieving, but we were going to engage the craft if they got too close to the ship. We split up into 3 teams of 5, 1 for each craft. Each team had a different color name: red, blue, and yellow. The blue team went to the port side of the ship, and aimed our weapons at one of the crafts. We started screaming at them to drop their weapons and put their hands up. However, they did not obey and kept coming closer to the ship. Eventually, I heard the lieutenant scream engage, and we began firing. Here's the weird part though. We began firing at them, and it was like we weren't even hitting them. I thought we were just missing, but then I looked harder in my scope and made sure I nailed the guy right in the leg, and I know I hit him even to this day, but it didn't even create a wound. The guy didn't flinch. They just stared at us. I looked over at my buddy and asked him what the hell was going on, and he looked just as confused as I did. I yelled out to the other teams if the same thing was happening to them, and they said that none of their bullets were doing anything. It was at that moment, all of a sudden, all 3 pirate crafts turned around and sped off in the direction they came. We were all left speechless and stood there looking at each other for a good 5 minutes, just trying to comprehend what we had experienced. Still, no one knows what was causing those men to not be affected by all of the M4 5.56 bullets, and we have not experienced anything similar since. Back in high school, before I enlisted, I knew this guy named Corey. We were never best friends, but we spoke occasionally. He was a quieter kid, but every now and then, when we did talk, the subject of him moving away after high school to Somalia and becoming a freedom fighter against their awful government came up. Always thought he was kind of crazy, but I always laughed and told him to go for it, because who knew how Somalia needed help? Well, about 2.5 years ago, while the Gary is conducting operations near the coast of Somalia, we get a call that a pirate vessel was circling the ship. We got geared up, and upon arriving to the vessel, we began detaining the men on the boat. And guess who I see on the boat with 3 other pirates? Good old Corey. I asked him how the hell he got into pirating, and he just looked at me. Never thought I would have run into crazy Corey, or that he would have actually gone through with his plans, let alone me run into him 7 years down the road halfway across the world. I never found out what happened to him, but it still amazes me to this day that something so unlikely would happen. This guy was a truck driver down in Australia, driving those huge land trains across the long outback roads. These are seriously lengthy journeys, and back then, every driver who wanted to make the delivery on time went past their max hours. As you might imagine, you get very tired, and it was common to hear drivers talk of hallucinations. So this guy is in the middle of his trip, driving along the dark, empty road, when he sees something big move onto the road. An elephant. Big grey beast, giant ears and a trunk, in the middle of the Australian outback, right where he's heading at speed. Of course, he's feeling pretty awake now, and swerves out to avoid hitting this thing, manages to miss it, but loses control of the vehicle and comes off the road. Mr. Trucker gets out unscratched, and looks back. Nothing on the road. Crikey, he thinks to himself, bloody hallucination. He checks his vehicle to make sure it's all okay, losing lots of time before getting back in and getting to his destination slightly late. He unloads his stuff, loads up with another delivery, and goes back the way he came. So here's Mr. Trucker driving down the same road again, still tired, making his way through the outback, when he sees it again. Not this again, he thinks. He's not losing any more time, he says. So he shuffles in his seat to keep his foot on the gas, and he plows straight into a 5-ton elephant, kills the elephant, totals the truck, and does not make it home in time for neighbors. Turns out the elephant had escaped from a circus that was traveling around at the time. Since then, my dad made sure, no matter how ridiculous something seemed, he, as he is a truck driver, always swerved. I had been single for a very long time. My kids kept telling me to get back in the swing of things, but I kept making excuses. My nephew told me about this dating site. He said there was no harm in talking to people, so I tried it out. I put everything out there, so there were no surprises when or if they met me. I thought that if they still contacted me after reading all I had described about myself, and we matched, then perhaps I would have a coffee with them. I matched with a few and the conversation went well. I met with one gentleman who was way too regimental for my crazy life, and kindly declined any more involvement with him. Another guy seemed too pushy, and acted like I should be honored to be in his presence. And then came Richard. I had very low self-esteem at the time. That being said, Richard seemed great. We carried on conversations for hours. He lived an hour and a half away, so all we really could do was talk to each other. We talked about our kids, dreams, goals. My daughter even friended one of his sons on Facebook. I was a secretary for some self-help meetings in my town, and he was going to school to be a counselor. Perfect, right? Well, we talked for at least 4 months, but after a while I noticed that he kept having small problems come up. Arguments with his mum, with whom he was living. No money for gas, his truck broke down, his eldest boy was mad at him, just little things, not anything that would set me off. But it was his, poor me, to heck with it attitude. I tried to let it go and really be a positive influence in his life. His mother and boys loved me and told me that they had never seen him so happy. Time went on and we were still talking every day. I had an opportunity to come see him, and of course my daughter went with me, so she could meet his son in person as well. I took him and his son out to eat at the only little coffee shop in that town. I knew I was on a fixed income, but I paid anyway because he was going to school and didn't have an income as of yet. We had a good time. We met at his son's house on the hilltop town, and we were having such a good time that I didn't even notice that snow was coming down hard and the roads were icing up. So my daughter and I stayed the night in one of his rooms. It seemed like the closer we got to his family, the more distant they became to him. It was odd. The next day the roads were clear. We said our goodbyes and I went home. Before we left, I received one extra hug from his son's mother-in-law. She whispered in my ear, "Don't fall for him." I thought that maybe there was something she didn't like about me. That came out of left field. The next few days we didn't talk, which I thought was odd. Did I do something wrong? Someone from the self-help meeting told me that there was a man looking for me. She said that he looked disheveled and smelled like alcohol. This wasn't a surprise, because I had helped quite a few people get back on their feet, and maybe this one fell off the wagon and just needed to talk. As I was driving down the street, I saw a truck in my driveway. I didn't recognize it at first, but it was him. He found out where I lived and was sitting in front of my house. At first, I was happy, until I looked in his truck and saw him slumped over reeking of booze. At that point, my fixed mode set in, and I asked him in for some strong coffee. He told me that he had a blowout with his mother, and she kicked him out and his boys won't talk to him. I got him some clean clothes and told him to take a shower. I figured we could sort it out the next day. In the meantime, I was taking him to a meeting. He sobered up and agreed to go. The whole time at the meeting, my friends were acting like I had lost my mind. Did they see something I was blind of? We went back to my house and he seemed okay. Almost too okay, like nothing at all happened. My son pulled me aside and told me he didn't like him much, but thought maybe he was just being overprotective. I should have paid attention. We went to the store because I wasn't prepared for the extra mouth, and bought 4 2-liters of soda, a gallon of milk, and 2 Monsters for him and my son, some chips and stuff for dinner. After we ate, we all watched TV and headed off to bed. I let him sleep in the spare bed in my room, but in the middle of the night he tried to get frisky. At that point, no. My grown kids were in the other room and something just didn't sit well with me, like he wasn't the same man he was before. The next morning, my daughter came running out of the bathroom angry. She said in a loud voice, Someone pissed all over the toilet. He didn't say a word. Later, we were all eating breakfast, and he started to let food drip out of his mouth onto the table and floor, and was spitting food as he was talking. He took 3 2-liters and drank them back to back, letting some run down his chin. Then, yes, there's more, he took the remote and started to set recordings for his favorite shows, deleting a few of my grandchildren's recordings set for weeks in advance. Wait. What are you doing, my friend? This isn't cool, I told him, but he acted like I said nothing. Then he went to the refrigerator and told me that I have to go to the store and buy more soda and stuff, as it was all gone. He even drank my son's Monster and the whole gallon of milk. At this point, my daughter was also livid, so she contacted his son, and he proceeded to tell her that his mum kicked him out the house because he wouldn't get a job and was stealing money and eating them out of house and home. His other son won't talk to him because he keeps asking for money and won't pay it back. He himself was mad at him for lying to me by telling me that he was going to school when he wasn't and was using me as his next big meal ticket. Well, that was it. I got all his stuff together, took it to his truck and asked him to leave. It doesn't end there. He had loosened some bolts on his transmission, making it impossible to move. He begged and pleaded with me to stay. He was at the point snot was coming out of his nose. He said he just wanted to be close to me and that if that meant sleeping in his truck, he would and that he couldn't live without me. Well, hell to the no. I called his oldest son and told them that if they didn't come with a tow truck and get their dad, his fate wasn't going to be nice. They arrived 2 hours later, apologizing for his father's actions. We found out through his son that for many years he had gone through many unhealthy relationships and took advantage of a lot of women that fell for his lies. He is still trying to friend me on Facebook to this day. This story happened when I was pretty young. I'm 22 now and remember it vividly. Growing up, we had a carriage house behind our home that my parents rented out. It was a small 1-bedroom apartment. The last man who lived in there gave me the creeps. Apparently he moved down to Savannah to be close to his mother. He did his laundry in our house, and I always hid from him when he was around. Despite tucking myself away behind shelves and around corners, he always found me. He thought it was funny to ask when I was going to start doing his laundry, while looming over me in his dirty vest. Although my parents believed I was just being shy, I knew there was something wrong to this man. He had the unhinged grin and cold black eyes so often associated to the villains in your typical story. It was enough to set off alarm bells in my young mind. In the days leading up to the incident, my parents noticed his behavior was strange. Every morning they heard him throwing up violently from his nights of heavy drinking. He was fired from his job working at the gas/electric company in the city for driving recklessly in the company car. One warm night in August, my mother was in the middle of giving me a bath when we heard a huge bang. My mother was immediately furious with my siblings, who she assumed broke something very big and expensive. She ran downstairs, and when she came back, I could tell the situation was far more serious than she'd previously suspected. My mum hoisted me out the bathtub, wrapped me in a towel, and rushed me downstairs in one smooth motion. When we got down, I realized that all of our windows had blown out, covering our home with shards of glass. My brother was on the phone with 911, and my sister was already halfway out the door. We all congregated in the front of the house. I remember being very self-conscious that I was in a towel, especially since the neighbors began to congregate outside. It turned out that the man renting the carriage house decided to take his life that night by cutting the gas line and lighting one last cigarette. He knew the line to cut because he worked for the gas company. Normally, the explosion would have obliterated our house as well. However, the termite damage in the carriage house's attic roof caused the roof to blow upwards. If it wasn't damaged, The explosion would have blown the walls outwards, which would have reduced our home to rubble. Who knows what would have happened to my family if that had happened? I don't know anyone who's been thankful for termites. The carriage house tenant didn't die immediately. Neighbors found him walking around the alley bleeding like crazy and laughing maniacally. He passed away in the hospital a few days later. It turns out his mother didn't even know he'd moved back to the city, even though he'd come to be closer to her, or so he says. I didn't know why anyone would choose to end their life knowing that they could end a whole family's life in the process. Perhaps he didn't know, but I find that hard to believe since he worked for the gas company and specialized in gas. Maybe he was too mentally ill to realize how his actions would impact us, or maybe he just didn't care. Regardless, I'm glad I didn't meet him again, and hope never to meet anyone like him again. I'm in the Navy, and I currently work on a base which encompasses an island called Saint Clement Island. The island itself is mostly deserted and untouched, but on the north end of the island is a town, for lack of a better word, where the Navy and contractors live. One night I was heading down to relieve a co-worker from watch. As I'm driving down the road, which is mostly pitch black, I see a figure in the street in my headlights. Naturally, I slam the brakes. I begin cussing up a storm because some idiot is walking in the middle of the road at night. Shortly after, however, I noticed it isn't a person, but more of a solid shadow. You could make out no features on it, but it had mass and was human-shaped. It was in the middle of the road, sort of stomping, almost like a weird dance. Then suddenly it was just gone. It didn't fade away, didn't do anything dramatic. It was just gone. I freaked out and told a lot of my co-workers who didn't believe me. I never saw it again, but holy crap was I afraid. I've heard stories of people on the island having doors in their work areas open and stuff on their own, but no stories similar to mine. I don't know much about the history of the island itself, but I do know at some point it was owned by Native Americans, and often remains of them are found or unearthed, often buried with the remains of foxes. I'm a chubby male, so creepers tend to leave me alone. When I was 19, I lived in Kentucky, pretty far from my North Michigan hometown. It was this little town called Pikeville, where there was very little crime. I actually kind of miss it, but I digress. My family came down to visit me for my birthday that year, and we agreed to meet up at the Hardys in town the morning after they arrived. I got there a lot earlier than them, and me being the type to show up 15 minutes early to everything, and them being the type who show up late. As I was standing outside waiting, this guy walks up to me. If you've ever lived in a place like this, you'll know everyone is super friendly. So it didn't strike me as odd when he began talking to me. During our conversation, all kinds of alarm bells should have gone off. Like after he found out I was in college, he said he saw me at a party. This is impossible, as I never once went out to a party. When he found out that I'm a gamer nerd, he started talking all about playing D&D all the time. He kept taking sips out of some alcohol bottle. Mind you, it's 10 AM at this point, and offered me some as well. He began talking about how he lost all his friends because he got into drugs, and I felt a little bad for him. He asked if I wanted to walk around for a bit, and since I knew my family wouldn't be there for a while, I went. This guy had been talking about how he lost all his friends due to drugs, and I felt bad for the guy. That, coupled with the fact that I hadn't encountered anyone like this, and the lack of crime kind of disarmed that warning part of my brain. We walked and spoke for a little while, maybe 10 minutes, before I realized that we were in a shady-looking part of town. I had never even realized there were shady parts of town of this small town, but here we were. We stopped in front of a house that looked long abandoned with this dark, narrow, sketchy alley next to it. He starts talking about how he knows 2 girls that live here and how they like to party. He tells me about how DTF they are and asks if I want to meet them. It was at this point my common sense finally kicks in. I'm in a bad part of town with a sketchy guy I don't know who's just talking about doing drugs, and no one knows I'm here. And now he wants me to go into an obviously abandoned house under the guise of meeting some ladies. I obviously declined his offer and immediately said I needed to go back to my family as they were waiting. He seemed a little upset by this and then asked if I could help him move a pool table into his van, which was conveniently parked down the alley. I declined as well. This is when he began to reach into his jacket pocket. Since those bells started going off, I realized just how much it might look like this guy might try and shank me. At this moment, my stepmom did the only thing she ever did for me. She called me to see where I was, and I took this as an opportunity to hastily exit. The creep followed me for 3 blocks. I don't know what exactly that he wanted, but it was probably just to rob me. Still, that area has a good amount of disappearances and is one of the worst in the country for people being taken. I don't know what could have happened had I agreed, but I can't help but think that one of them is a scene from The Silence of the Lambs, where Bill lures a victim into his van. I hope he got the help he needed and is doing better, but I also hope just as much that I never have the misfortune of running into him again. I had went into the gas station with a co-worker to fill up on gas. When I was on my way to walk inside, this woman with long, red and matted hair kept on staring me down. I even said, "Evening, ma'am," as I went inside. As I got in, I turned and looked and she was still staring. So I went about my business, grabbed a drink, and was fixing up a hot dog, when I see that she is still staring. I turned to my co-worker and told him she was being a creeper. My co-worker just replied she was just admiring my beauty, as smart-ass as anyone ever could be. He then later noticed that she was acting weird towards me, and as we went to leave I mentioned to the clerk that they had a doozy on their hands. See lot lizards there all the time. And mentioned, she had ran off with people and had been there for 3 days prior to this one. Anyway, as I went to turn around and leave, she was pressed up against the door, holding them shut and staring at me. I motioned with my hand for her to move, and she took a step back. I blew through the left exit door and sprinted back to the truck. The next night, I hadn't seen her before work and thought she had left, but that night I had a pack of smokes and some gas. I entered and exited and never saw her until I was about to leave. As I put the fueling pump away, I could feel someone had come up behind me, and sure as hell it was her. I just slowly turned as I opened the door, and she tried to force her way into my truck. Luckily, another co-worker was at the pump next to mine and forced her off me, and a police officer was there to help assist and put her out in his squad car. Ever since, I tend to stay away from that place. I'm a big guy. I couldn't move an inch due to sheer fear, and even conceal and carry couldn't move a single inch. I live in a house on a cul-de-sac with my mother, 2 brothers, and a roommate. I work 2 part-time jobs, one of which is in the same office my mum works at. She's a doctor, and I work with medical records. I'm 20, my 2 brothers, some twins, are 17, and my mother is 57. The roommate is 18. We also live very close to a volunteer firehouse that blares an extremely loud alarm when there's an emergency. Everyone within a few miles can hear the alarm. We are middle class and live in a modest house but has a large front yard as our driveway is super long. 7 years ago, we moved into our house, and for a while everything was chill, until we found out about our crazy neighbor, Bob. He has extremely paranoid schizophrenia, and legitimately believes that the government is after him. He thinks that people are trying to brainwash him via microwaves, and he freaks out whenever he hears a plane pass, because he thinks they're after him. Whenever the firehouse blares the alarm, Bob calls the police because he thinks someone's after him, and every time they have to tell him that he can't do that. He also made some odd comments about one of my brothers too. For a few years we didn't hear much from him, until one day he sent a letter in the mail trying to sell us his baseball cards for $1 million. Apparently, he sent the same letter to everyone else in the cul-de-sac. Everyone discarded the letters. All our neighbors are aware of Bob. They thought he was just a little crazy, but mainly harmless. We thought so too. We were wrong. Last winter, we began to find mysterious footprints in the snow. It was a human's footprints across the front yard of the house. We knew it wasn't any of our footprints because none of us walked so far out into that part of our yard like that. As I said earlier, our front yard is very large. We just shrugged it off as something odd, and for a while Bob hadn't bothered us, and we weren't thinking much of him at the time. Fast forward a few days, police were at Bob's house. Apparently he's being evicted. We breathed a sigh of relief, because he was weird, but we didn't think much of it. The next day was a normal day, nothing odd, until Bob showed up at work. He started to rant to everyone about how he's in the military, before going to my mum's secretary, asking to have lab work done on him. This was raising a bunch of red flags because my mum never told him where she worked. Not only that, but to find my mum's secretary, you'd have to go back behind the main row of secretaries, as each doctor has their own, and there are about 15 in each, into a small area where a large printer is. My mum's secretary is in that smaller area, and it should be impossible for a stranger who hasn't been there before to know where she was. How the hell did Bob know where to find her and ask for my mum, despite never being there before and never telling him her name? This freaks us out, and we decided to do some research on Bob. It turns out his father was ex-military, and that Bob owns a bunch of firearms. His shady behavior towards my mum and showing up at our work could only mean one thing. He was stalking us, and he's dangerous. At the very least, we began to suspect that he was going through our mail, as it's very likely his footprints were those that were in the snow. My mum got a peace order. It's kind of like a restraining order, and then notified all the other neighbors about what happened. We thought maybe things would die down, but nope. Today he was in the parking lot, staring blankly at one of the secretaries. She said he was sweating and looking a little off. He didn't stop staring at her and asking about my mum. Now everyone in the family is on edge. He has guns. He's been stalking my mum at work and is being evicted. He doesn't have much to lose if he did something dangerous. We notified the police, and they are making sure to lock the doors and install security cameras so that we can see if he comes onto our property again. No one is allowed to be home alone until this craziness stops, and until we know for a fact that we will be safe. Also, my brothers, roommates, and I went to dinner with my dad and his girlfriend. Mum stayed home, and apparently my mum was home alone. She heard strange noises, and our dogs were going crazy. And a few days after, he threatened to kill my brother, and we called the police. I just hope we don't meet again, as unlikely as that sounds. I was in class with a few military police officers and heard some stories. There were multiple times where they would get calls or alarms going off in parts of the hangars we work, and when they responded, no one is in the hangar anywhere near the phone or in the room the call came from. One guy that worked the dispatch desk at night said for 2 weeks straight he'd get a call at exactly 3:15 every morning, and there would be no sound whatsoever. He left the phone on for 5 minutes to listen for any sound, and there'd be nothing. Not a dial tone, breathing, or background noise. Nothing. Another was when they would exercise or train on the weekend in our hangars, and they would see things move around the aircraft or across the hangar from where they are. When they would investigate, there wouldn't be anyone in there with them. It wasn't any of us, because we didn't work nights on weekends. The last one. My base is next to a mountain, and one section of it extends all the way to the base and up the side of the mountain. All along that area are little silos or channels running into the mountain. None of them are used, and they're all locked up tight, have been for years. One night they got an alarm going off in one of those little channels, and were sent to investigate. Shortly after the alarm, they got a phone call from there, and when they picked up, the line went dead. When they arrived, the door was locked as usual, and showed no signs it had ever been messed with within the last 10 years. They opened the door and took a look inside. There was a ladder that went down a lower room, and inside that room there were signs that someone was living there, and they seemed fresh. A few bottles of water, a foam pad to sleep on, some bags. None of it seemed to have dust or anything. As soon as they saw it, they left and locked it up tight. They had security sit there till morning and had someone come out to chain the door shut. I was 14 at the time and had spent the night at my best friend's house, who was a year younger than me. We were pretty responsible, well-behaved kids, so we were trusted to be left home alone at times. That morning it was just 3 girls in the house, me, my friend, and her older sister, who was actually just about to leave for work. Parents were at work too. It was around 10 to 1 a.m, and I was laying in her bed, half awake, trying to fall back asleep. I'm a massively light sleeper, and her sister would always be the loudest in the morning when she got ready. And although me and her older sister, low-key, weren't that fond of each other, I never said anything. My friend Gabby and her sister Cheyenne. I could hear Cheyenne making her way out the front door, Gabby behind her to close and lock it after her. I heard Cheyenne say something along the lines of, "Make sure everything is locked," and how there's a weird man across the street sitting on the curb facing the house. She leaves. I got up because going back to sleep was not an option. I have had sleep issues for as long as I can remember, so I was sitting on her bed with pancakes, and we were just chilling eating our breakfast. This was about 10 minutes after Cheyenne had left, so me and Gabby were just chilling and talking, and I brought up how our sister said something about a guy across the street, and I said something along the lines of, "Your sister is so dramatic." I kid you not, there's knocking right on the door after I said that. Me and Gabby sat there looking at each other in silence. Her bedroom was located at the front of the home, so windows faced the street. I peeped through, but I didn't see a guy across the street. I creeped to the front door and I made a tiny peek to see who it was, because her front door had this big old window with some shades. I didn't want whoever was there to see me. Long and behold, it was him, the guy Cheyenne warned us about. I knew because Gabby silently freaked out and was like, "Oh, it's him." We ran to the bathroom and called her sister. Gabby's house never really got visitors. I know this because I was always there. So there we are, locked in the bathroom, flipping out. Gabby said something like, "He's seen me after Cheyenne left. He knows I'm home alone." I was beyond scared, like, what if he somehow finds his way inside? We just knew he didn't have good intentions, so obviously now he knows there's a young girl in the house by herself. So her sister was on the freeway and wasn't able to return, so she told us to call their uncle who lives nearby. Her Uncle Mike rode a motorbike, who was really nice and tough looking. Me and Gabby are like sisters almost. So while we're waiting for Uncle Mike to show up, the stranger starts to frantically ring the doorbell. It got quiet for a little bit, and then he started to knock on the door really slowly. It was the creepiest thing ever. All her dogs outside are barking like crazy. Then before we know it, I heard her uncle's bike pull up. In relief, we left ourselves out the bathroom and run outside. So us 2 little girls thanked God that he made it quickly. The story isn't over though. When her uncle pulled up, he pointed him out. "Is that him down there?" Gabby lived across the street from an elementary school, which was only a few houses down. The dude was standing in front of it facing us, watching us. Whoever that weirdo was, I'm just glad I never saw him again. I'm a former US Marine. During a field training event, we were doing night live fire drills. I was cresting a small berm, and when I did, there was a loud mechanical whirring of the pop-up targets coming up. So I went through the metal drills of hitting the ground in a relatively safe manner to take a shot at the pop-up target. I took another step and put my hand out, right hand on rifle, left hand out slightly from my body, and I lost all balance. I hit the ground and heard crack, thump. Nothing unusual about that on a firing range, followed up by cease fire, man down. I look around at a bunch of stuff standing over me asking if I was okay. I was fine. Why would they ask? I take off my helmet and see that a guy in my fire team has fired me, mistaking me for a pop-up. The round glanced off my helmet and tore a hole in it. I took no damage, but due to a faulty helmet, I had to stay behind on all further runs. As I was doing something near my tent, I heard a voice say, "That was close. Next time you should stay behind Parker." I laugh and say, "Yeah." I turn to where I heard the voice, and there was no one there. I searched the area, there was no one around. This freaked me out, and would have been enough to keep me on edge, but I brushed it off as my mind playing tricks on me. Fine, cool, whatever. 6 months later, and we're balls deep in house clearing bullshit in Iraq. I hear that very same voice, "Remember to stay behind Parker," right before we enter the house. I take a look behind me, and sure enough, the guy was right behind me. I take a step to the side, acting like I was doing something, and he instinctively moved forward. I duck in behind him. Unfortunately, he didn't make it through the house. To this day, I blame myself for his passing. I never stop thinking about what may have been. I know if I'd have gone in first, I wouldn't be writing this if I'd have been in his place. I know it's not right to blame myself, but I do. Maybe it is right. All I know now is whenever I hear that voice saying, "Remember, don't take lead," or something like that, I listen. I've heard it twice since that day. Hate me if you like, I hate myself enough for listening to that voice already. In 2008, my boyfriend Jonathan and I moved into our first apartment together. We were so excited that we would have our own place and finally be adults. It didn't take long into our new apartment to spot the complex's resident weirdo. He lived in our building on the 3rd floor, and we were on the 1st. He was late 50s to early 60s and had a face that seemed to lack all emotion. He drove an incredibly rusty old truck and would go outside to feed the wild cats in the area every day. He seemed harmless, weird, but harmless. One day, Jonathan and I get back home after work, and he's outside standing beside his truck. His eyes are glued to us, and shivers run down my spine. Jonathan tells me that he doesn't want to get out of the car because he's freaked out. I don't want him to know that I'm on edge too, so I reassure him that we're in the open, it's daylight, and nothing bad is going to happen. We exit the vehicle, and I open the trunk to get my backpack because I was planning on grading my students' vocabulary quizzes. And when I close the trunk and look up, the creepy old man is right in front of me. His eyes are wide, as if he has just seen something that unnerved him. "Oh, I'm sorry, you scared me. Is everything okay?" I say. "No," he responds. "That woman that just moved into the 4th floor is awful." His voice reminded me of one I've heard before, but I couldn't put my finger on it. "Well, sir, I haven't actually met her. Is there—" She called the officers about these cats, and now they're going to call animal control on them. "Oh, wow. I'm so sorry." "Yeah, I figured you guys would feel the same. This place is a hellhole, and they've gone to shit the past year. He puts his hand to his mouth as if he's about to tell us a secret. I used to work for them, you know. I'd open up and close the pools and clean up a bit around the property. They fired me a few months back, once they found out about my lifestyle. They don't get our lifestyle, he says, moving his finger around to himself and Jonathan. I assumed that he meant because we were gay men, but even now I'm not entirely sure. Damn, that's messed up, Jonathan says, trying to edge his way closer to the apartment door. Yeah, they're a bunch of knobheads, and I hope that new girl hears that. He says it at points, and I realize I've heard his voice before. A Nightmare Before Elm Street. He sounds just like Freddy Krueger. Well, I hope it's not too bad. I start working there on Monday, Jonathan says. Well, good luck. Try and keep your personal business quiet, otherwise you might be out of a job. Just don't turn into one of those assholes, or karma may come back to get you, the old man said, chuckling to himself. Jonathan and I nervously laugh as well. Well, good luck with the cats. We'll see you around, I say, putting my hand on Jonathan's lower back and slightly pushing him towards our apartment. All right, guys, nice talking to you, he said, still chuckling to himself. Although it was more creepy than joyous, it reminded me of the Joker from Batman, a maniacal laugh. A month passes and we see the old man occasionally. The cats were still there, so we figure things worked out for him. However, we hadn't had another conversation with him, thankfully. Jonathan managed to keep his job at the office, where there was not a trace of homophobia. And that's when we heard the news. Evicted, I said, when Jonathan came home from work one day. Why are they evicting him? Well, my boss says that the office receives harassing calls from him on a weekly basis. Even some other tenants have reported being harassed by him. I mean, yeah, he's creepy, but is that enough to evict him? I guess so. They gave him a week to get all his stuff out and move. A week later, Jonathan was at the office, and the old man came to return his keys. Jonathan was at the front desk, and had already phoned for the manager. But the old man started whispering things under his breath. Get out of here. They're all awful. Just get out. The building manager grabs the keys and escorts the creepy old man out of the building. A week went by, and we hadn't seen any trace of the old man. Jonathan and I are watching TV around midnight, when I hear a knock on the door. I pause the show thinking that it might be a neighbor complaining that our TV is too loud. I look through our peephole and see the creepy old man staring at me through it. A smile covers his face, but it's unnatural. I've never seen a smile so big in my life, and it makes my whole body run cold. I start to stumble back from the door. Jonathan sees that I'm pale with fear. Babe, what's wrong? He whispers. It's the old man. I whisper, tears welling up in my eyes. Jonathan gets off the couch and stands behind me. We're both facing the door, and the man knocks again, and it startles me back to reality. I start walking into the kitchen, and I grab all the knives that I can. I tell Jonathan to go into the bathroom, which is the only room without a window, and to call the police. I start to walk to the bathroom too when I hear keys start jangling against our door. I look back to find that the security bolt was not folded against the door. This works like a hotel room security bolt, where someone can use a key to open the deadbolt, but as long as the security bolt is across the door, it won't open fully. I silently made my way over to the door, knife in hand, and slowly and quietly fold the security bolt across the door. As soon as it touches the door, the old man bangs into the door, making me jump back a bit, almost dropping the knife. Then it went quiet. No keys, no knocks, no bangs. Whispering, come on boys, let me in. It's just me. Come on, it's karma. I wasn't utterly freaked out before, but I am now. I run to the bathroom and close the door quietly so he doesn't hear us moving around and knows where we are. Jonathan has already gotten off the phone with the 911 operator, and she says the police were on their way. 5 minutes pass and it's still quiet, so Jonathan wants me to go check if the men are still there. I look through the peephole and don't see anything. I sigh with relief, but then I think to check the parking lot to see if his truck is there. I go to our guest room with a view of the parking lot and peer through the blinds. His truck is parked right next to my vehicle, and I see that he's in the driver's seat of his truck. He's staring at me. Well, I can't be 100% sure, but it looks like we've locked eyes. I don't want to move out of fear that I'd be giving myself away on the off chance that he wasn't actually looking at me. He opens his truck door, and that breaks me from my stupefied state. I run back to the bathroom and tell Jonathan to lock the door, and I fill him in on the information. About 3 minutes pass before we hear a banging on the door. Shit, I say under my breath. But then we hear, "County Police." I'd go check the peephole and it's an officer, so I open it and tell him what's going on. The officer says he saw the truck outside, but no one was in it. He says he was going to look around the apartment and see what he could find. Jonathan and I continue to camp out in the bathroom. All of the lights in our apartment are now off. We wait to hear from the officer, but within 10 minutes we start to hear crazed screaming, almost demonic noises, hisses, coughs, screams and laughs. My heart drops. I'm overcome with more fear than before. What's going on? 5 minutes later, the police officer came to our door and said that he found the man in the vacant apartment directly above ours. When the officer got there, the man was standing facing a corner and laughing under his breath. When the officer put the handcuffs on him, he began thrashing around, screaming and hissing. The officer told us that he had him in the cruiser and that they had arrested him on breaking and entering charges. When the police officer left, we checked the front of our door where there were now dents from the man's keys. He struck our door with them after being unable to get in. The next day we went upstairs with the manager of the apartment complex and we saw a small hole in the floor of the bathroom in the apartment. Apparently, the man must have known we were hiding in our bathroom, and he was trying to get there from the ceiling above us. Fortunately, he didn't have any heavy-duty tools to do the trick. This hole was made by a screwdriver being stabbed into the linoleum floor over and over again. So, creepy ex-neighbor, let's never meet again. I'm a mail carrier. I know, super interesting, right? Honestly, you'd be surprised at the amount of weird stuff that happens to us. I've had people follow me while I'm delivering and trying to get into my delivery vehicle to steal stuff. I've had a customer vomit on my car after she opened a parcel her husband sent her that was meant to go to his mistress. I have delivered adult toys that fell out of their flimsy packaging, and I have seen people doing it near my more secluded routes, and they didn't stop for me. This is the kind of stuff that typically happens to us contract carriers. For those who don't know, contract carriers are mail carriers who buy a contract for a mail route that is typically in a rural area, from what I understand. The fancy mail jeeps cannot traverse them, so we use our own vehicles to deliver the mail, and we are paid on a monthly basis depending on the type of route, how long the route takes, and the day-to-day stuff, and what the post office deems as fair. Technically, we're self-employed, but we still have to abide by the rules of the post office, and we have to become certified to even touch the mail. But of course, being in the areas that we are in most of the time, that kind of weird stuff I mentioned happens all the time. Those things happened to me when I was a sub, someone who works for a contract holder but does not own the route in any way. I was paid by the person who owns the route out of their own pocket. Now, however, I am the somewhat disgruntled owner of a 10-year route contract for the first time. I've owned the contract for about 7 months. It's a pretty easy gig. The route itself only takes about 2.5 hours to case, sort the mail for delivery, and another good 3 to 4 hours to deliver on a good day, 5 to 6 on super heavy days. I'm not looking forward to how the holidays fare on this route. Thing is, before I got the contract, I had no idea what I was bidding on. The way someone gets a contract is that they bid for it. The person bidding will give a month's salary amount that they feel would be fairish for the route in question. The post office and bid holders then decide which amount is the most accurate, in their oh-so-wise opinion, for the route, and they give it to whoever has that amount. I was lucky enough to get it, so I get a pretty damn good pay that I technically chose for myself. All I know of the routes was that it went down into the valley. I live in a very small desert city with some very wide outlying mini communities. These outlying areas are where the majority of our office contract routes deliver to. My route goes 25 miles out of town to a lot of small ranch properties in the closer areas, and some pretty scattered random loner properties in the farthest areas. There are a lot of hills, and the dirt roads where I go to, it's very easy to get lost out there if you don't know where you're going. There's one area in particular that goes through a small forest, nestled between a random outcropping of hills heading out onto the state highway. It's not like an evergreen forest or anything. That's just the closest definition I can give. There's not really trees so much as gigantic bushes that nestle together very closely on either side of the road, that is towards the end of the route, but it takes up a good chunk of my customers' addresses. When I was training, the previous owner of the route, called Jim, gave me a rundown of the people who live on the route. There are a lot of ranch owners, of course, and they are the ones who get the most parcels. This isn't surprising to me, since they're the richest people out there. We, of course, call that section the ranches. There are the elderly retirees that live at a tiny retirement community set up by the city out there. It's pretty spread out, like a teeny tiny town of their own. That's the area with the second most amount of parcels, lots of random buying, and sometimes gifts from relatives. We call that area the retirement homes. These are the customers I speak to the most. There's the outskirters, as Jim called them. There are the people who live so far off the grid that most of the time we don't deliver packages to them. As a general rule, we are not allowed to deliver boxes to our house if it is more than 3 miles away from the mailbox. Most of them live about 5 or 6 miles from the boxes, and their boxes are in a long line, or clusters as we call them, on the side of the road. As a courtesy to these customers, I ask them to give me their phone number so I can call them if they have a parcel and they can meet me at the box. Most of them don't mind, and I'm grateful for them, because a lot of these roads are treacherous. I once tried to be nice and deliver a box to one of them, and got stuck, unable to move my car for almost 4 hours as I lost service. Eventually they found me, and that's when they gave me their number at last. They don't get many boxes though in that part of the route. And then is what Jim called the ghost town. It's not really a town per se, but more of the secluded homes like the previous area. But these guys are closer to the road, and they're the ones who live in the forest I mentioned before. He called it the ghost town for good reason. These people are either never home, as most of them are snowbirds, or the ones who are very creepy. There are a few homes out there that are usually vacant, that have a lot going on. For the stories I'm about to tell you, there are 3 homes involved. 2 of them are in the ghost town. The other one takes place in the outskirts area, and that last one is the worst. There's more, honestly, but these are by far the more interesting as far as history and the stuff that's happened. Number 1. The Bailey Cluster. The Bailey Cluster is a group of homes in the ghost town that belongs to a single family with the name Bailey. Their mailboxes are all nestled together on the same side of the road against some of those large bushes in the forest. Just before the mailboxes, there are 4 total. It's a small dirt road that leads up to their property. The whole road has to be about 4 feet across. That's how it feels when you're driving up. because the bushes on either side will scrape the sides of my car. I've gotten more than a few scratches because of them. I've asked them to trim down the bushes, but they never do, so I just gave up. When you get to the property, you're met with a large 6-foot-tall rusted iron gate with the name Bailey fashioned out of bent horseshoes and pipes welded to the top. As a general rule, if the gate is shut, we are never encouraged to try and open it to drive in. We aren't really supposed to walk in if it's shut either, unless the customer has told us it's okay. For the Baileys, I get out and walk their parcels through the gate and up to the first house, which isn't far from the gate. I have to state now, I have never once met these people in person. I've spoken to them on the phone, and I've been on their property, but I have never once seen hide nor hair of them. There are a total of 10 people at the address, and their mail is split up, as if their homes are in like a trailer park. For example, one of them gets their mail at 111 Ghost Town Road Mobile 1, Little Desert Town, la 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 la, and the other person number 2, number 3, number 4, and so on. Every time I bring the parcel, I just leave it at the first house. Once you walk through their gate, you have to walk uphill a bit, and you can see the teal-green roof of the first house peeking up over the hill as you walk, and when you get closer, it becomes apparent why the place is so unsettling. Clowns. These people love clowns. There are clown statues, paintings, mobiles, wind chimes. You name it, it has a clown on it. They even have clown dolls scattered around the place. None of them look nice. They're all threadbare and worn out for sitting in the hot desert sun all day. I'm pretty sure animals have made homes in some of them. There are a few that are big enough to house a small family of squirrels. Now I know that this isn't bizarre yet, and I'm getting there, I promise, but you have to admit that this is more than a little odd. The first house is a simple single-wide mobile with a bright teal green painted roof. The windows all have clown decals in them, little clown faces that look like they're straight out of a vintage coloring book, hand-colored and everything. At one end of the place is the porch, not too big, and it juts out about 6 or 7 feet. There are small awnings, with dozens of clowns, wind chimes, and sun catchers hanging from it, almost making a curtain out of them so they're clustered together. On the porch is a rocking chair. This thing is painted like a clown. The curved rockers are painted red. The legs that attach them to the chair are yellow with red polka dots. Their seat and arms are white, and the back is white, with 3 big red dots painted on it like puffballs on a clown shirt. The top part of the back has a clown face on it. Put it all together, and it's a nightmare. This chair is where I'm asked to leave the parcels, and I do, but I'll never forget the first time I left them there. There were 4 boxes for them, number 1 and the rest for number 3. I called ahead of time to let them know I'd take them there and I'd be there in about 3 hours, since they're towards the end of the route. It takes longer to get to them, and I'm always told by who I assume is their matriarch to leave them on that chair. I'd never been up to their property at this point. I'd been delivering about a month, but only ever had mail and small parcels that fit in the box for them. So when I went up there for the first time, seeing their little clown cluster was a bit nerve-wracking to say the least, as I am terrified of clowns and have been since I was a child. But that's a story for another time. I crept up to that first house and peered around the place. It was so isolated and odd. I felt like every single clown around me was watching me. I placed the boxes on the chairs in a neat little pile and settled on the chairs to stop it from rocking so the boxes wouldn't fall off. Once it was still, I turned and hastily tried to leave. It was the creaking that stopped me. I froze and listened, knowing full well what it was. I turned, and sure as hell that chair was rocking, and not just a little, but enough to knock one of the boxes on the porch. It was like someone had deliberately pulled it all the way back and thrust it forwards to the rocks as violently as possible. I didn't hesitate. I just ran and noped the hell out of there. I'm not staying after that. Another time I had a parcel for them, and I almost wrote it up out of protest, but I called again and was asked to leave it on the chair. This is the time I noticed that it felt like no one was there. I'd been there a dozen times by that point, and I remember standing on the top of the hill by the gate just peering around me like, where is everyone? According to their mail, there are at least a few children that live there, and when I was there that day it was the middle of summer. Why weren't the kids home playing outside? Why didn't I ever see anyone? The second and third house are a bit far away from the first house. It'd be about a 5-minute walk I think to get to them, but you can see them pretty well. Curtains always open, but I never see anyone inside. The fourth house is the furthest away at the top hill. They have built a big picture window facing the gate. It too always has the curtains open, but I've never seen anyone there. Weirdest of all, their vehicles are always there. They never move. They are 2 old trucks, an SUV relatively newish, and an old station wagon. The wagon looks run down, but the others look like they're taken care of and always clean. This other time I had a parcel and noticed no one was ever around. I got curious and phoned the woman. I always do when bringing parcels. I figured I'd just tell her I was making sure someone will be back soon to get the parcel, as there is a lot of theft out there. There usually is on more secluded routes. You'd be surprised how much more common it is out there than in the city. I heard a phone ringing in the house beside me. If I'm on the porch, I can peek into the window just behind the evil rocking chair. It was close, the phone that was ringing, and I wanted to see someone pick it up. I squeezed myself behind the chair and looked in. I'd never looked inside before. More clowns, of course, and some clown-themed throws on the couch, and pillows too. On a side table, clearly visible from the window, I could see the cell phone lit up with "Mail Lady" as the caller ID. No one answered, but when I left she called me back. She'd gone about 5 minutes when she did. I just told her I wanted to be sure someone was home, and she said, "Someone is always here." According to Jim, he never saw anyone there either. The third and final most interesting thing to ever happen at the Bailey cluster was just last month. I got a very large box for them, one I needed a dolly for. I called before I even left the post office to let them know, and the lady I always spoke to told me she would have her oldest son help me. I thought, finally, I get to meet one of them. This ought to be good, right? I get there, it's my last package, and then I was free to breeze through the final 50 or so boxes I have after them. I have a total of 670 boxes on my route. I go to the back, pull out the dolly, slide the box out onto it, and start dragging it up the gate. I look around. No one met me, of course. The lady told me he'd be waiting for me on the porch of the first house, and when he saw me he'd come down to help. You can see the gate from the porch pretty well, but I could never really see my car from it, so I honked just in case he couldn't see me either. No one came down. I waited for about 5 minutes before saying screw it, I'm taking it up. I struggled up the hill with it. I didn't know what was in the box, but I'm pretty sure it weighed about 75 pounds. The post office have a 70-pound weight limit that a lot of companies try to stretch to 75 or 80. Usually they'd go to UPS, but sometimes they'd slip through the cracks and come by us. I get to the first house, and of course no one's there. I look around, and as usual I'm all alone with a bunch of clown dolls gaping at me. I wiggle the box up the chairs on the dolly and lean it against the railing next to the rocking chair. It's way too big to sit it on, and I head down to my car. That's when I hear a "thank you" from behind me. It's a man's voice. I quickly run back up the hill, and not only is there no one there, but the box is gone from the porch. This was in the span of 10 seconds. I wasn't even down the hill all the way. It doesn't take that long to walk back down. I look in the window, and everywhere, not seeing a soul. I hate going to the Bailey cluster, and I end up going there a lot. Number 2. The Blood House. This place is the one that gives me the most creeps. While I was training, Jim told me about this place. This is another snowbird place where the people only live there between October and March. They were there when I started, and they came back the beginning of this month. Super nice couple. I really like them, but not a clue why they live here. Jim told me that back in the early 90s when he first started working at the post office, the guy who used to do the routes before him told him the story. According to him, there was a family of 5 that lived there. All of them were absolutely crazy. The mum had schizophrenia and would apparently abuse the kids because of voices. The father was no better. He was a worthless drunk who just sat by while his wife hurt the kids. One night, the eldest child of 18 was fed up with how they were raised and tried to escape with his siblings. The mother, of course, tried to stop them, and the kid finally snapped. He killed his parents and painted the walls with their blood. The incident changed him, and while his siblings escaped, he stayed in the house with his parents' corpses until he ended up cutting his own throat and tried painting the floor in his blood before succumbing to his blood loss and perishing himself. They weren't found for months. The place was cleared out and torn down and rebuilt, and the guy who built the new house was compelled to paint the house red. It's not obnoxious red, but it's too red, if that makes sense. There's no long driveway up to this place. It sits right on the end of the road at the end of the ghost town. The end is literally a dead-end road, and they're right there at the tail end of where the sign tells you to turn around. The current owners, let's just call them Mr. and Mrs. Nice because they're nice and I'm not that creative, have told me countless horror stories about living there. Sometimes I think that they get some sort of sick thrill out of it. When they're not there, I forward everything, but I always have to pass their house to get to the turnaround spot, and their neighbors always have mail, so I have to go by there no matter what. I've seen some really weird stuff there, but every time I pass the blood house, I just get this awful feeling of dread. Whenever I did deliver packages to them, I'd step out of the car and just stand at the edge of the driveway. It feels like standing at the precipice of a cliff. It feels like stepping onto their property. It's like jumping to my doom. It's terribly unsettling. I honestly don't know how they stay there for as long as they do. I mean, they leave for 6 months out the year, so I guess for them it might not be too bad. But if I feel that way just delivering packages once in a while, I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me. Mrs. Nice told me to always watch the 3rd row window from the left, because that's where the son went mad, and where he likes to sit. She calls him Tommy, despite the fact it's not his real name, but she feels like it suits him. She talks about him like he's her own son. I think she pities him. She believes that his soul is trapped because of all the terrible things he did. When she first told me, my reaction was, no thanks. But one day the temptation got the best of me, and I looked. When you're at their mailbox, you can see into all their windows. The house is long, 1-story place with 6 windows, 3 on either side of the small front door. Of course, the house is red with the trim and the door all white. The window in question is the one that sits right next to the front door on the left. So I looked in and couldn't believe my eyes. I didn't see a full-bodied apparition or anything like that, but I definitely saw a face. And it looked so anguished, like the happy and sad mask you see for drama and theatre. It looked like the sad mask, just pinned. I blinked, and the face was suddenly gone, and the curtain, which had been open, was closed. On another occasion, I walked up to the house to put a package by the door. The nice couple weren't home that day. Their truck was gone, so I decided to put the package around the back and leave a note in their box to let them know, since I didn't have a number for them at the time. When I walked around the back, I put the package over the small fence into the backyard. Once I did, I turned and felt myself run into someone. But there wasn't anything in front of me. Nothing but air. but I swear I felt someone was in front of me. I didn't want to move forward. It was like an invisible wall had erected before me, and while I couldn't see it, I knew that if I went any further, I'd get hurt. I just felt oppressive and strange. I actually backed up into the house and slid along the wall all the way to the front, and whatever invisible force was there, I felt like it followed me. I actually began to weep because I felt like there was a person just pressing up against me as I moved, like they were trying to force me back. Once I hit the edge of the house, I ran. I ran to the car and sped away, crying most of the way back, because it was so terrifying. When I told Mrs. Nice about it next time I saw her, she said Tommy likes to do that. He tries to intimidate people, and he does it to Mr. Nice all the time, apparently. Around the 3rd week after the Nices left for their summer home, I passed the house and swore I saw someone standing at the mailbox. But it wasn't solid. It was like a blurred outline of a person, and when I got closer, as I passed, the head seemed to turn with me as I drove, watching me. I do not like passing the house. I'm glad they're back for the winter. It makes me feel a bit more at ease to know they're there. But I still don't like the idea of delivering packages to them, as I don't want to be anywhere near Tommy. And of course I have saved the worst house for last. The Hills Have Eyes house. I hate this house. This is the one that isn't in the ghost town. This is in the section before it, the outskirters. These are the homes that are so scattered we usually won't bring parcels to them because they're so far away. But this house gets an exception because it's less than a mile from the cluster of boxes they get their mail at. These people are never home. Jim told me that apparently they're very rude and hostile. He instructed me to just go to their gate, and if they have a parcel, always bring the mail with it, or they will call and complain. Leave the parcel in the basket that hangs in their fence with their mail in a rubber band, and leave. He said to never linger there. He told me that if I did, they got hostile. I do as I'm told, but thankfully they've almost never been home. But something is. I know that sounds cheesy, but it's true. I don't know the history of the place itself, just that these people are apparently the world's biggest pricks. 2 men live there, brothers from what Jim told me. They run a small chicken farm and bring their eggs to the feed store in town to sell all the time. It's not uncommon to see their chickens roaming around the roads leading up to the house. The road itself is barely a road. It's more like a bumpy little walking trail, but it's the only way to get there. And I know I've said already, but God, I hate going there. I call it the Hills Have Eyes house because it's settled between 2 large hills and far, far away. The hills look like eyes and the house looks like its mouth. That and the way the place looks. It looks like something out of the movie The Hills Have Eyes. There's butchering equipment everywhere, bloody knives and cleavers and chains and hooks. They've got cows too, but I think they keep the meat for themselves. The smell is just atrocious. It always smells like death. To be honest, it wouldn't shock me if these guys committed murder out there and only butchered cows when they did to make excuses for the stench of death. Every single time I go there, something happens. I've been out there 6 times to deliver parcels, so I will recount each incident. The first time was around 3 months after I started delivering. I did as I was told, wrapped the mail in a rubber band and headed out to the house. Takes a good 3 or 4 minutes. It's around a bend, and then that's when you see the 2 other hills that the house sits between. The main house has a fence around it with a gate, but the whole property has an outer fence with no gate that I go through. Once you're up against the gate, the whole place looks a lot smaller than it is because it's full of junk. All the butchering stuff, random metal sculptures, a bunch of worn-out furniture, garbage, a few cow skulls here and there, and then the house itself. The house is just a small trailer that's been cemented onto the ground so it's no longer mobile. A makeshift ramp/porch that sits against the door and leads to the gate. This is where the basket for packages is. All around this gated area are coops and other fenced areas for the animals. It's smelly and weird and creepy around there. I just tossed the box and mail into the basket and turned to leave. I didn't want to stay at all. When I got to my car, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw a man standing behind my car. But when I poked my head out to ask him to move, there was no one there. Of course, I didn't want to stay another second. The second incident was closer to the evening. It was another super heavy day and I did not want to go out there. As I was approaching, I saw someone standing at the window of the house. I assumed it was one of them trying to see who was coming. I have car magnets on my car that all say USPS on them, so people know who I am, and I figured he'd seen them and be more at ease knowing a package was coming and not some random weirdo. But as I approached, the figure in the window distorted and eventually vanished entirely. I did not want to get out of the car. I just wanted to stay there and toss the parcel and mail out the window. After working up the courage, I sped from the car to the basket, and as I went to leave, I was getting right to my car when I heard this loud, raucous laughter. It sounded like it was right next to my car, like someone was standing beside me. I prayed I wouldn't have to return in a while. 2 months later, I had to go back with 4 big boxes for them. This time it was a pretty light day. I was breezing through delivering packages very quickly, so I was happy about that. They're about in the middle of the route, so they're like a halfway point for me. I went to the house and was greeted by a large bull in the yard. I'm not usually nervous around animals, but a bull isn't something you want to mess around with. He was standing just a few feet from the fence with the basket, so I just patiently waited to see if he would move. I didn't want to honk, lest the angry beast who lived in there happen to be home and come out and yell at me or something. I didn't want to shoo him because honestly I didn't think it would work. All of a sudden, this bull goes crazy, freaks the hell out, thrashing about as if someone were riding him, and came dangerously close to my car before running off into the area where the fences were. Then a whole chorus of moos erupted from that area, and it was just a cacophony of noise. I grabbed the boxes, got them to the fence as fast as I could, as I didn't know what spooked the bull, and I didn't care. I just wanted to leave. I didn't see anything this time, but I was afraid the bull would be coming back and tearing up my car, or even goring me in the process. The 4th incident is honestly not the worst, but unsettling nonetheless. I had never had a package so small that it fit in the box for them. Honestly, I almost said screw it and shoved it in the mailbox. I should have, but I didn't want them to call and complain. They hadn't on me thus far, and I wanted to keep it that way, so I reluctantly headed to the house with the package and their mail. When I got there, a single dead chicken was hanging from the awning above the porch. Weird, but honestly not surprising. Not as surprising as the giant dressed cow hanging from the pole on the other side of the yard. I didn't notice that until I was putting the package in the basket. It was obscured by a tree when driving up the place, and as I'm walking back to the car, the chicken and the cow both suddenly start to swing. It's not windy, and even if it was, one of these things is a cow. I don't think a light breeze is going to push it. They're swinging back and forth almost in tandem, and I just went nope and left. I wasn't going to stay for the rest of the show. The 5th time was 2 weeks ago. It had been quite a while since I went out there, and I had vainly hoped that I wouldn't have to go back for long. But oh well. The holidays are starting. Everyone is getting stuff. I get out there with 3 boxes, and for the first time I see a living, breathing person in the window. Jim told me one of the brothers was in a wheelchair. This was that brother. He was bald with a weird tribal tattoo across where I believe his hairline used to be. He was sitting in the window staring at me. I waved out of courtesy, and of course he didn't wave back. First time either of us had ever laid eyes on one another, but I didn't know what I expected him to do. Smile back and wave? When I know damn well these guys are dicks. I noticed, as I put the parcel in the basket, that he wasn't looking at me, but something behind me. I looked and saw someone walk behind one of the chicken coops. I looked back at the brother in the window, and he gave me a grumpy sort of, "You saw that, right?" kind of look, and nodded towards the coop. I just slowly nodded and went back to the car. He watched me back out, and as I was turning back onto the road, I saw him leave the window and draw the curtain closed. The last time was yesterday. I was having a typical holiday season Monday. Very heavy day with lots of mail and lots of parcels. And of course, they had to have a whopping 5 parcels. I get out there about 4 p.m. and I'm already exhausted, halfway done, knowing that I'm not going to finish until around 7. It takes a good 45 minutes to get back to the post office and another 10 to unload and finish my day. I know I won't finish the route until about 6, so I'm trying to hurry, and getting out to this place doesn't help making it in good time. So I get out there, get out, put some of the boxes in the basket and the others below the gate to leave. Suddenly, I feel a hard tug on my shirt that pulls me backwards, and I fall on my ass in the dirt. I hit my head on the edge of the trailer and swear to myself before getting up. I thought maybe I had my shirt caught on something, but as I get further away I feel another hard tug and fall back again. This time I know I didn't catch on anything, because I was about 2 feet from the fence on my left and there was nothing on my right and nothing directly behind me. I scramble up and try to run as I pull hard, and I feel another tug and I hear that god-awful laugh again. I didn't look back. I left. I still talk to Jim every now and then. When I tell him about these incidents, he goes, "Oh yeah, that place is haunted." More so than some of the others, I think. In Jim's opinion, the whole route is damned. There are, as I said, other places out there where weird stuff happens, but these are the ones I find the freakiest. After yesterday's little incident at the Hills Have Eyes house, I felt like I wanted to share these stories with someone other than my husband. Either way, I'm in a contract now, so if this is the best of the last 7 months, I'm sure I'll have way more stories over the next 10 years to come. I'm a military officer, and have seen my fair share of crazy. Back in 2010, when I was still a sergeant, I was out on a training mission with my unit. We had all the gear packed up since we were going to stay in the wild for a few nights. We go deep into a forest out in nowhere, Minnesota. The nearest house must have been at least a 2-hour drive away, and there was no signal. We set up camp and start to make ready for the first exercise. When we are all done with the exercise, we have to make dinner, which is nothing to say hooray about. It was just some MRI. God, I hate that food. As we ate our food, we head off to bed so that we could get up at 4 in the morning. 5 people were pointed out to guard in switch. I had the guard at 2 in the morning. All the other guards were reporting strange noises from the woods. They said it sounded like someone talking to each other and walking around. We were all a bit scared even though we had our guns. An hour into my guard switch I hear the voice. I point my gun into the area of the sound. I don't dare say anything, so I slowly back up to wake up the others. As I got up the staff sergeant, 5 shots fire. Needless to say, everyone is awake now. People are scrambling for their guns. In a matter of minutes, everyone is ready and a hunt begins. We are all ordered to go out and capture whoever shot at us. After searching most of the night, we were going to call it at that, but one of the specialists had found an old and run-down looking house in the forest. We go and search the house. 6 soldiers go in and search, while 20 others are guarding all exits. We found no one inside, but it looked to be a meth lab. So, what I think of this story, I think it was some crackheads that were cooking meth there, and they thought for some random reason that we were campers, and when they saw soldiers, they ran for it. Back in 2006, when I was 17, I met this girl called Cindy through mutual friends. We became really good friends and hung out often over the next few years. As the years went by, she started hanging out with the wrong crowd and acting gangster. By 2009, I had my own car, and the only time Cindy would call me to hang out is if I did her a favor first, which was a ride somewhere. Eventually, I got tired of this, and any time I would call her, she usually wouldn't answer. I got fed up and stopped being her friend. In 2011, after a while of not seeing each other, I forgot who contacted who, but we got together to hang out. As usual, she needs a favor first, a ride over to the next city to visit a friend. Forgetting all the times this happened in the past, I said yes, and this led to one of the most terrifying moments of my life. After picking her up at her house, she tells me last moment that a female friend is coming with us too. Me being an idiot, I pick her up too, and I'm all happy that I'm hanging out with two girls. We get on the highway, and despite asking numerous times where we were going and what we were doing, she wouldn't give me a straight answer. But I drive on as I'm happy to be hanging out with two girls. A while later we reach our destination, and it's a correctional facility. She came to visit a male friend, who we'll just call suspect. After sitting alone in a lobby and questioning my life choices, they come back and we leave. I was pretty quiet on the drive home, and they didn't even ask me what was wrong. They happily chatted and left me out of the conversation. I dropped them both off and went home. A few days later, Cindy calls me and asks me to hang out again, telling me it will just be her this time. I say yes, and we set up a meeting for the following day. Then something important came up, and I called Cindy to let her know that I wouldn't be able to see her then. She didn't like this, got angry, and hung up. A few hours later, when I was home, she messages me and tells me not to blame her if guys come looking for me. A short while later, I get a call from the correctional facility, and being stupid, I answer it. A gangster-sounding guy addresses me by name, insults me a bit, tells me that I'm about to get lit up. Cindy then messages me saying that there are guys in my neighborhood looking for me, and this is terrifying because I was out in front of my house working on my car. I tried calling her and she doesn't answer. She texts me again letting me know they're close, and I immediately tried to call her again to no reply. She texts me and says the only way she can stop them is to pick her up and drive her to the correctional facility. Being terrified and fearing for my life, I oblige. This time she brings another female friend, Melanie, who I know, and we head over to the correctional facility as they blare their music in my car and act like nothing happened. After they visit the inmate, they proceed to drink in my car, despite me telling them not to. They blare out more of their music and eventually spill an entire bag of chips and crush it into the carpet. I ask them to clean it up as they're getting out of the car, but they just walk away without a word. I dump all the garbage and chips out my car onto the street in front of her house and find my iPod on the floor, oily and mixed in with everything. Feeling terrified and disrespected, I block Cindy and her friend's number so they can never contact me again. Later on, through mutual friends, I learned that Cindy and Melanie gave the suspect my name and address and set up the whole thing. I recently moved to this area. The house is nice, and as I've said before, the closer to the main road in this small town, the better. It's not a bad spot either, and we're right on the corner, so I can look out the window and watch the kids get off the bus. It's 2-bedroom. It used to be 3, but we pulled the bed out of that room after my daughter went to stay with her dad. Now that room is for the computer and various instruments my girlfriend plays. I honestly love this house. There's just one issue. We live right across the street from a church. Now, some would think that that was actually nice, and I've had people say that it was just that. Most would be right, but we're pagan. I know it's not a big deal, but being right across the street from this church is no cakewalk. The front of our house has mud splattered all over it. Pretty sure someone saw the sticker on the door that read, "Of some paganist junk about God or something." We think they didn't care for that and got frisky and threw mud. Now, that's not really a big deal, and I honestly think the people of the church had nothing to do with it. My girlfriend seems to think they did, but I don't indulge her on it. There's more to this story, more that my girlfriend actually doesn't know. She works all day, and I stay home with our 2 boys. I mostly stick to the house, only stepping outside maybe once a week to play with the dogs or the boys. I'm not much for outdoor fun, and I'm very introverted. One day in particular, I was out on the front yard letting the boys look at spiders, when I noticed something odd about the church across the street. Cars were lined in a row, as if there was a service that day. It's not one of those churches where they hold anything on a Tuesday, so it was odd. I dropped the thought a few seconds later, when I told myself they must have been doing a fundraiser or something. Churches do that, right? I pointed out a beautiful cabinet spider to my youngest Neil. We were checking her out and I was explaining how they could catch food, when I heard a commotion across the street. I look up to see a group of people all shuffling from the church in a hurry. It looks like a family with a few added friends. There were 2 small girls looking to be twins, her parents, and 2 tall lanky old men that look half dead. My boys looked to them mostly because I was just staring. Nell, my sweetest little weirdo, called out to them. He yelled a hello and began waving. I waved too and called out an apology. Seemed like the right thing to do. The parents kept walking and never looked up, never waved at anything of the sort. I wasn't sure if they had heard, but then again the 2 girls looked at us and one of them waved. She was quickly stopped by one of the walking corpses that followed her. Was this like some weird cult stuff? Anyway, I thought this was a bit odd, so I told the boys to go inside while I went over and spoke to the parents there, in the hopes to getting them to come by and have a cup of coffee and invite the girls to play. It was neighborly. The boys went in, leaving JJ in charge, and I strolled through the ditch across the road and over the little parking lot. I waved at the father who was about to get into the car. This was all new to me, but I thought, why not let my boys make some new friends? The father, this man, was less friendly. He just shot me a glare as I got close enough to speak to him. I mustered up all my big girl superpowers and spoke. Hey there, I'm Sarah. I live right over here. I see you and your wife have 2 lovely girls. I look at the twins and smile. Everything was normal for 2 seconds. Then the smaller one spoke to me in such a defeated, tired little voice. We're not for sale. I chuckled a bit and turned to the father. Okay, weird kids. Well, she's sure something, I sang out in that southerly way. The man just glared at me, then looked to one of the walking dead that had escorted his children. They're not for sale, one tall man said, in such a dull, ugly voice it almost hurt to hear. I was confused. I looked at all of them and looked back at the father. I don't want to buy them, I say. I just thought that you and your wife could come by, have some coffee, and let the kids play together. Sound fun? That's when the woman, the mother, got out the car. She took off her sunglasses and glared at me. Her voice reminded me of the lady that asks for the manager. My girls wouldn't be caught dead with them 2 boys of yours. I've seen you, all of you. Lesbians, heathens, devil worshippers. God is watching, little girl, and he does not like what he sees. He will strike you down as his name. She held up her hand as if she was about to slap me. Instead, she held it up to the sky and kept on with her ramble. It dawned on me as she cast me out in the name of the Lord that they thought I wanted the girls' souls. It was then confirmed when the woman screamed, and you will not buy my children. Their souls belong to him in Jesus' name." They honestly thought I wanted to buy their kids' souls or something. I never laughed so hard in my life. I apologized to them for bugging them and for upsetting them, and then returned home, all the while listening to that woman screech about God and this and that. I got back inside, looked at my boys who had been watching through the window the whole time, and Nell, as always, had something to say. "Mummy, if you buy those kids, can I keep one in my closet?" Thank you, whatever God is out there, for giving me such a weird child. My boyfriend was in the army before I met him. This is by far the creepiest story he shared with me. He lived in a 2-story townhouse on base housing in Fort Hood for about 6 months. Tenants always came and went because of deployment. Weird stuff would happen both at night and during the day, mainly thuds in his bedroom on the 2nd floor and shuffling. He felt uneasy being in his room. He also always slept in the living room couch on the 1st floor. On the weekends, he would be up late playing Xbox, being the achievement hunter he is, and due to insomnia, wouldn't fall asleep until 5 a.m. One night he was up late on his Xbox dashboard, sitting on the sofa chair smoking a cigarette. His Kinect was plugged in. As many of you know, there's a screen on the bottom right corner that shows an infrared version of what the Kinect camera can see. This lets you know that it is detecting. It's really sensitive, and although it is sometimes frustrating to use, surprisingly accurate. This is when the hair behind his neck stood up. He noticed the infrared screen. Standing to the right of him, alongside him, was a solid female figure. He wanted to add that he has never used his Kinect after this, even after moving back home to Chicago. I can attest to that. My cousin was a drummer in the 60s. He toured the world for many years. When he retired, he brought his own tour bus and drove bands all over the USA. When bands were in the area, the stars stayed in a hotel, but the band would stay with me. This was when bands toured an area for 4 or 5 days. I was 16 and a good cook and a great baker thanks to my grandma. When the bands would arrive, I would have a layout of my specialty 3-day lasagna, bean dip and chips, hamburger pie, my famous peanut butter fudge and peanut butter cookies, and a lot more. Enough to feed an army, my mother would always say. When my favorite band would arrive, we would go hang out with the band and my cousin at the venue, and sometimes watch the show. This one time we were hanging out with the band in front of the club they were playing at. The Star stayed at the back of the bus. My mother, father, sister and cousin were talking near the back of the bus. The band members and I were hanging out near the front of the bus out of sight of my parents, and I was sitting on the hood of our car with my legs crossed, wearing a casual skirt or halter top. The 5 band members were near me, with only one, my crush, next to me about 10 feet away. He was smoking, and I really didn't want to breathe that stuff in. Some man was kind of drunk, walked over to where I was sitting. The guys thought I knew him, but I certainly didn't, and pushed me back onto the hood of the car, pulled my skirt up, and was trying to pull my halter top off. He was so fast, he was like an octopus. In no time, the 5 band members had him on the ground while my crush adjusted my clothes and held me in his arms while I stood sobbing. My parents, my sister, and my cousin came running when they heard the commotion and saw me sobbing in my crush's arms and the drunk man on the ground. The police were called and arrived in 3 minutes, and I had to tell them everything the man did, which left me sobbing more. He was taken to jail, and I don't know what happened to him, but the fact that these band members jumped into action to defend my honor was appreciated very much. They came out a few more times and said they would take me on the road with them when I turned 18. The week before my 18th birthday, my cousin passed away from a sudden heart attack from all the drugs he used in the 60s with his own band. I was beyond crushed, and spent a week in my room crying. So many of the guys I met called to say how sorry they were. A few of the stars also took the time to call, and even my crush called several times. So to all the band members who were wonderful to me and my family, thank you. To the drunk guy who tried to assault and do something worse to a 16-year-old girl, let's never meet again. Back when I was in boot camp, I was sent to an island called Pulau Tekong, off the coast of Singapore. This island's entire population is made up of only military personnel or afflicted people, and there were no animals allowed into the camp, and security is posted 24/7. To even get there, we had to take a ferry for 10 minutes with our bags checked before we could head on the ferry, and checked again after we reached the company line. I remember that this night was particularly cooling, and around 10 p.m. it started to rain. My platoon was on the 5th floor of the building, and sometime around 3 a.m. I was jolted awake. There was an unmistakable sound of cats meowing on the floor. At first I thought I was dreaming, but they started to get louder. I sleep facing the window of our bunk, but there was a thick mist outside even though it was raining. My vision into the hallway was severely limited, and I was shocked by this and look around the bunk to see 3 other section mates awake as well. We look at each other and started asking what was happening in our hall. In the midst of talking, there was a loud screech that pierced the meowing cats, almost as if someone dragged their nails across a chalkboard. Through the thick mist, a few figures ran past my bunk, too blurry to actually make out what they were, due to the screech. The entire platoon woke up and ran into the hall, where the mist seemed to quickly retreat. The next morning we looked in the hallway, and there were paw prints in our bathroom, even on the ceiling. The second story happened after I got posted to the unit, after completing boot camp. Back in 2017 there was a shooting competition between Asian countries, and Singapore was playing host. My camp was where the ammunition and pistols came from, and I was the duty vehicular man during one of the weeks. I was told that I was needed at the ammo point at 2 to 4 a.m. every morning, along with the duty clerk for the day to clear the personnel that were coming to collect ammo. The ammo point is located on a hill, about 4 clicks away from headquarters. This particular morning it was around 12:30, and after getting confirmation that an escort into the ammo point was not required, I started the vehicle and began making the drive back to HQ with the clerk beside me. You know how motion lights work. When you walk into a room, they'll light up, and after a while, if you leave, they'll turn off. Well, the road back to HQ was littered with street lamps with motion sensor lights. As I started making my way down the hill with nothing but foliage on both sides, the lights I passed started going one by one with a deafening sound. It immediately started to get cold, which is something that never happens in Singapore due to the humidity. I looked at the clerk and told him something felt off and that I was getting goosebumps. A primal sense of fear took over me as I realized that something might be trying to get us. I zoomed down the hill with the lights going off behind us one by one, and it seemed to be getting faster, almost as if we were being chased. We did make it back to HQ, and it was here that we realized that it wasn't cold like how it was back then. I asked a warrant officer who had been posted there about the general area of the ammo point, and he told me that the music and drama company's building, which is about 500 meters away from the ammo point, is haunted, and because of what I went through, they had to get a religious leader to come and bless the building again. In my first year of driving a semi, I was pretty naive to what happens in truck stops and rest areas, to say the least. Not knowing the world around me can have some pretty awful places. That being said, I took a load out to New York City heading to Savannah. With the hours I had left, I planned to stop for my break in Jessup. Arrived while the sun was still up, around 6:30 p.m, and didn't think much of my surroundings, so I went inside to eat. After eating, I went back outside to see literally 60 women wandering around everywhere. I had to guess they must have been between the ages of 18 to 75. I was propositioned at least 15 times on my way back to my truck, and it didn't stop there. All through the night, I had a lot of lot lizards knocking on my truck door. Worst place ever to take a break. I never stopped there any longer. These women all looked like they chose meth as a career in life. Jessup MDTA is a place of sadness and despair. When I was in Iraq, we were on patrol one night and stopped at an intersection pulling perimeter support for another unit who had requested assistance in our area. The mission went off without a hitch, and it was honestly a little boring just waiting around. Then it got really quiet. This was in Baghdad in the city. It's never really quiet, even at night. But it was as if all the sound was sucked out the area. Suddenly the entire block lost power, and it was very dark. Within seconds of the power going out, close to what I can guess was about 50 dogs flooded the streets from an alley and ran around our Humvees. They didn't bark, just growled as they ran. As soon as they entered another alley and out of sight, the power came back on, and all the normal city noise returned. It was incredibly unnerving, like a horde of demons had just passed us, in the form of dogs. This happened quite a few years back, when I was 14 years old. Let me just preface by saying that I had previously been told by my old best friend Jenna that her neighbor had some entirely creepy tendencies. I slept over her place a lot, but never encountered this neighbor. The guy was married and had children, and his house was directly behind Jenna's place. There was a wood fence in her backyard that separated the neighbor's backyard and theirs. Jenna had a deck, and the stairs were a few feet off from the house, so you could fit a fairly small person in between the deck stairs and the house. You could see into the neighbor's backyard if you were standing on the deck, but not if you were on the grass. With that understood, we had a half day at the school, so I went back to Jenna's place. I wasn't allowed over there that day, but since we were inseparable it didn't really matter, and we weren't expecting her mum to be home from work for a good few hours. Her mum ended up coming home early, so Jenna and I scrambled to the backyard so her mum wouldn't see me and not get in trouble. We went outside and wedged ourselves in between the stairs and house so her mum wouldn't hear the fence gates open, as it made a lot of noise whenever it was opened. We waited for a few minutes until we started hearing shuffling in her neighbor's backyard. We could faintly see him through the cracks of the wood, and it looked like he was putting out his recycling or garbage. Instead, he was making his way onto the bin and poking his head over the fence to look in the windows. From the backyard you could see into Jenna's mum's window, the bathroom, and parts of the kitchen. We saw him, but he didn't see us. We were shaking and holding onto each other for dear life as we watched her neighbor stand upright on the bin to get a better view into the windows. He kept shifting from bin to get better angles, into what we assumed later was into Jenna's mum's room, since she got back from work and possibly into the bathroom. This continued for 5 to 10 minutes, us trembling and trying not to move or make a noise, while her creepy neighbor kept trying to peep in. He eventually got back down and went into his house like nothing had happened, while Jenna and I hopped on her fence gate soon after. A few weeks later we had another incident where Jenna's sister took a shower late at night and went into her room. Her blinds were open, it was dark outside, and there was a tree that sat in the front yard, and it was snowing pretty heavily. She called us on her phone, saying she saw someone in the trees and couldn't see them anymore. We told her to turn her light off, while Jenna and I did the same in her room. We peeked out the window but couldn't see anything. We went into her sister's room and asked what happened. She was convinced she saw someone in the trees who she believed was their neighbor. So Jenna and I went out to the front to investigate. By that time he was gone, but we did find fresh shoe prints in the snow that went from the neighbor's front yard to the tree, then right up to Jenna's sister's window, before it trailed off back to the neighbor's house. My friend always wanted to report him, but her mum always shrugged it off and said he's not harming anyone, so let it be. Jenna got a boyfriend near the end of our friendship, and he also saw some of the creepy stuff that went on, and he gave the guy a fright and threatened him if he ever tried doing anything like that again. From what I'm aware of, I don't think he peeps anymore, or maybe he just got better at it. I was a 26-year-old small female and lived in Texas the time when this happened, and still lived with my parents, but was working to try and afford an apartment. Almost every day I start the day by taking my Bichon Frise dog, Molly, for a walk. She was an absolute love bug and wouldn't hurt a fly. My dad had adopted her for my 20th birthday. I started walking. 2 blocks in there was a house with 3 men on the porch smoking and talking to each other. I see them almost every day when I walk. 2 of them never paid any mind when I was walking past the house, except for one of them who I had never seen before. He was a bit big compared to the other 2, and looked to be in his 20s and was bald. I thought he was one of their friends. When I saw that he was staring in my direction, I quickly faced forwards. Growing up, I was a very antisocial person, so I wasn't the type to greet anyone who I walked past. But these guys didn't seem like the kind of people to say it to. As I kept on walking, I heard the bald man yell out, "Hey gorgeous, nice puppy you got there. Come over here, let me pet him." I walked faster, but turned around to see him walking down the porch and down the sidewalk. "Why you walking so fast?" he called again. I heard laughter from the other 2 men. At this moment I began jogging with Molly. Halfway down the block I turned my head to see him walking back to the house, but that didn't stop me from jogging back to mine. When I got home, I had the chance to tell my parents, but stupidly didn't, thinking that it wasn't serious. The next morning I had a bad feeling, so didn't go for the walk. But the day after I did. Feeling a bit more scared, I secretly took my mum's pepper spray just in case. I began the walk. Being the dumbass I was, I walked past the same house, expecting not to see the man, but of all my luck the man was there. He was sitting on a rocking chair on the porch, looking as if he were waiting for someone. When he saw me, he shot up as if his chair were on fire. My eyes widened as he started following me. "Stop walking away, I just want to talk." In fear, I picked up Molly and bolted down the sidewalk, getting away from the man again. But to my horror, I looked to see that he was chasing after me, and I started to freak out. He was fast, too fast. The next thing I know, he's pushing me onto the ground, making me fall on my face onto the hard concrete, and dropping Molly, who began whimpering and barking, knowing that something was terribly wrong. I began screaming for help. He rolled me over, covered my mouth, blocking my screams, clawing at his hands and struggling to get him off me, when I realized I had the pepper spray in my pocket. So I took the can out and sprayed him in his eyes. He screamed out in pain and rolled off me. I quickly got up and picked up Molly and sprinted home, leaving the guy rolling on the ground in pain. I got home and of course frantically explained the situation to my parents. My dad, who is a retired Marine, wanted to go up to the house to confront the man, but my mum told me to go to the police station and file a report. I spoke to an officer and told him what happened. I showed him the bloody nose and cut on my forehead caused by falling face first. He said he would go over to the house and bring the man to the police station. I never got an update on that. A few months later, I avoided the block where the incident happened and wasn't bothered by anyone. The job I worked at was at a 7-Eleven open 24 hours. My friend who also worked there asked me to work the night shift because she needed to take care of her sick brother. I accepted and did what I had to do. After the night shift, I walked home. When I turned the corner, I noticed a pickup truck driving slowly and way too close to the sidewalk. I never paid any mind to it until it kept following me. Speeding up my pace, I walked through an empty alley hoping to lose the car, and finally it wasn't there. As I was walking up to my house, I looked behind me one more time to see the same pickup truck driving past. I got the chance to see two men in the truck, panicking and opening the door and slamming it shut. I told my dad what happened and he told my mum. She started going off on me about how if it was the same man, and he knows where I live now. I will admit I felt stupid for going straight home when I should have been looking out to see if the truck was following me. For 2 days, my dad was on the lookout in front of the house in case someone tried something, and nothing really happened until the next night. This night traumatized me, and guilt still consumes me to this day. It was about 2 a.m. when Molly, who was in bed with me, started barking at something at the window behind my bed. Being too tired, lazy and grumpy, I shrugged it off and tried going back to sleep. It wasn't until I woke to hear Molly yelping in pain. I opened my eyes and shot up in a panic and saw my dog's lifeless body in the floor, covered in blood, with a dark figure standing over her. My heart stopped and tears filled in my eyes. I was ready to get off the bed and run, but then a heavy body was thrown on top of me. It was the same man, but he covered my mouth and I let out a scream, hoping my parents would hear. "Do you think you could pepper spray me and get away with it? I think not." My vision blurred after the man punched my eye. "Stop fighting. This'll be quick." I kept on kicking and hitting the man, but he didn't flinch. I heard him trying to get his belt off. Pure terror swept over my body. Then all of a sudden, I heard my door swing open with my dad and his gun in hand with Mum behind. As soon as he saw the man, he shot him twice in the shoulder and once in his lower back. The man screamed in agony and I pushed him off me. My dad then ran up to the man, grabbed him by the collar and started beating the crap out of him, showing no mercy. My mum ran up to me, hugging me, frantically asking if he hurt me. Ignoring what she was saying, I just ran up to Molly, who was still whimpering in pain, and I held her until she passed. My dad screamed at my mum to call the police and stopped beating the unconscious man, not caring that he had bullets in him. When he saw that he was a sliver away from death, he stayed with me and comforted me until about 5 minutes later when sirens were heard in the distance. My dad dragged the almost perished man outside to the police while paramedics came up to my room to see if I was okay. Turns out that not only the man was at the house, but his 2 other friends who were waiting 2 houses away in a van had a rope and a gag and a pack of tweezers, for reasons I never want to know. When the man recovered from the beatdown my dad gave him, police took him into custody. He said the plan was to break in, take me, and go to the same house and do horrific things with me until they were done. The reason why the guy tried to go right into my bedroom was because he wanted me first. He stabbed my dog, my best friend. Not only that, but he tried to assault me in the worst way possible. The fact of that makes me want to throw up all over my screen. Every day I always thought what I could have done to avoid this whole thing from happening. Most of you think she was just a dog, but to me she wasn't. I never stopped thanking my parents for saving my life, and for the man, he got life in prison. I hope he rots for the rest of his life. His friends were also caught along with him and were sentenced to 16 years for multiple charges. I still live with my parents, not because of lack of money for an apartment, because of how paranoid and scared I became of being alone. As I'm writing this, I feel disgusted and guilty. I have served in the United States military, as a petty officer in the Navy, and as a master-at-arms. I served the entirety of my tour in Okinawa, Japan, which, if you're in the Navy, is one of the most boring billets out there. The first year and a half there, I probably only had 2 calls, both being medical emergencies. We have 3 tiny bases that absolutely almost nothing happens on, and a small little patch of land on the largest base of the island, Kadena Joint Air Base, for our offices and headquarters. So the entirety of us, Master of Arms, are split into different sections for obvious reasons. This didn't happen to me, but my section was on shift the night it did, and I had an almost front row seat for the entire thing. At night we have to make multiple rounds to make sure our buildings are locked, and that no one is trying to break in. Again, I'm not going to say how or when, but on this night we had at least already made a check on the building, so we knew that everything was okay. So the group I'm assigned to is on the Camp Shields, which is right down the road from the base, and where we come from in order to do our checks. Since the buildings are on Kadena, the Air Force security also patrols the area and usually helps us out. One night we get a call from the Air Force dispatcher, and they say they had just received a call from our HQ building. No one spoke on the other end, but it was a solid 10 seconds of silence before the dispatcher heard the phone get hung up. A supervisor for our group, another higher-ranking petty officer who I've worked with for a while and is a super cool dude, takes one of the other guys and they load up and zip over there. When they come around the bend to where the buildings are, the first thing they see is our HQ, and that one of the side doors is wide open, and it's nothing but pitch black inside. Again, we had checked the buildings earlier and knew that this door was shut, locked and secure. So what was probably the first time in what legitimately had to be at least 10 years, our officers drew their weapons and cleared the building for a real-life situation. It may not shock any of you to learn they didn't find anyone or anything out of place. There is a pretty good chance that the whole thing was a prank, but Okinawa is one of the most haunted places on Earth, and that place is super creepy at night, even with another person and a gun. As a little fun side story, one night I was assigned there. I happened to not be fully geared up, for reasons, and we happened to be short-staffed that night as well. And because needs and musts, we had to check the building and only I was available. Alone, with nothing but a flashlight. And I had to walk around between these buildings in the middle of the night in the pitch darkness, and I don't mind admitting I was terrified. I was rounding the corner to the front of HQ, and all of a sudden I hear pounding feet darting towards me. I jump about a mile in the air, fumble the flashlight, and am jerking myself in all directions to try and find whoever it is. I realize after a moment that the sound is still going on, and I look up to see the flag flapping in the wind. Honestly, not one of my best moments. There are tons of stories and urban legends on the base as well. If you Google images to search CFAO Headquarters Okinawa, the very first result is our HQ. You can see the flagpole of doom. This happened years ago, but haunts me to this day. Back when I was in middle school, I lived next to a small neighborhood. All I had to do was hop the fence and I'd be in the neighborhood where all my friends lived. We were all between the ages of 12 to 13 and there were 5 of us. One of the houses we were in always had a backyard on the edge of the woods. We had created trails through it, complete with bridges over the creek that led to a reservoir of sorts, where all the rainwater went as well as the water that drained from the sewers. I say sewers, but it's run off from the street that we used the tunnels under the road during intense games of manhunt. We called that place the Wall. The wall backed up quite literally onto our house in the neighborhood and the next street over, and we could clearly see houses through the trees in any direction we looked, so it was not like we were ever far. Besides the trails we took, there was a main exit along the fence to the house aforementioned that led straight into the heart of the neighborhood. Now the Wall was right by the next street over. On our side, where the wall sat, there were 3 houses. In one of those houses lived a very well-known police officer whose kids we were friends with. The opposite side had some massive farmland to the left and a heavily wooded area to the right, complete with its own empty, boarded-up creepy house that couldn't be seen from the road unless it was winter. No one had lived there or been in there for years. So like I said, I'm just trying to paint a picture here so you can understand. We were very, very close to other homes, which made this story an odd one. One day my friend and I, just 2 girls, decided to go to the Wall, taking the familiar trails through the woods, and we made it to the Wall. Weeks prior to this, a group of us had been trying to make a bridge so we could continue our work between picking up branches and heaving stones, when we noticed something coming from the woods across the street. A man. This man was dressed head to toe in camouflage, typical hunting gear that I've seen before. The weird thing was he had a shotgun in his hand, in a residential area. Luckily we noticed him before he did us, and I'm so glad we did. When he noticed us, his eyes locked on both of us, and his pace began to quicken, and he made a beeline straight towards us. He never said a word or even lowered his weapon. It was just in his hands, ready to give at any moment. We snap out of it and take the exit, sprinting into the heart of the neighborhood, running straight to my friend's house to tell someone. We tell her dad immediately, and he goes to check it out, only to find that no one was there. Not a trace. I don't know where or how that man was out of sight so quickly. Her dad wasted no time and was down there in seconds. The wooded area where the man came from was not large, at least not large enough to ever consider hunting on it, and it was definitely not hunting land. It is an extremely residential area along an elementary school that we used to walk to in less than 5 minutes. So I never understood why the man was out there, especially since there was a cop who lived right next door to where we were. To the hunter, I hope we never meet. That incident scared us so badly we stopped playing in the woods and never returned to the Wall. I have a neighbor that I've gone along with since I moved in 8 years ago. My neighbor is a policeman and lives with his wife and his only daughter. He's a very kind person, enough so that he has helped many people financially and given people a roof over their heads to help improve their lives. He has taken 2 men into his house that he feeds and helped get jobs. They were so kind and funny people that even I liked them, and they've helped me many a times and made my life a bit more fun. I always saw them in and out of my neighbor's house, until one day they stopped going. I figured that they had found a house after months of searching, and 2 weeks after, I visited them since I finally graduated college. I go to their house, and when the door was open, it was the wife, Veronica. Her face was pale as if all her energy was drained out of her. She broke down into tears in front of me. I walked inside and we walked towards the living room, and she tells me that her husband, Robert, is in jail. This is from Veronica's perspective. On the 24th of May, 2016, Robert had told me to bring Jessica, their daughter, to school because she was late. I agreed, as he then left for work. Jessica comes to me, telling me she's not ready to leave. I look at her and tell her that I'm going to be late for work, and ask if she could walk to school. She said she could. I gave her some snacks and she left. 3 hours later, they call me from school saying she never got to class. I'm scared. I call Robert and tell him that Jessica isn't at school, so he asks his superior to let him look for her with his 3 others, and they agreed. He searched everywhere, and it occurred to him that she might be home. He goes home and walks towards the front door and sees traces of blood. Thinking someone other than his daughter was inside, he pulled out his firearm and signaled his partner to come in with him. He slightly opened the door and started walking fast, following the trail of blood, expecting the worst. The blood leads him to Jessica's room, and he opens the door, terrified of what he might find. He opens the door and finds his daughter silently crying. Jessica was bleeding between her legs, her face swollen from what appeared to be beating, and her face looked dead. She couldn't even stand properly. He gave his firearm to his partner and ran to his daughter. He asked what happened, tears running down his cheeks. Moments after, I arrive from work to start the search, and I walk in to see the traces of blood and begin to panic and run to Jessica's room like my life depends on it. I shove the door open wide and see her. I couldn't help but cry. I ask her what happened and am sobbing like crazy. Robert's partner called backup and an ambulance. Robert didn't let me hold Jessica. He kept holding her as if his grip around her would help. I felt like a useless mother. The ambulance arrived and they took her to the hospital, and Robert volunteered to go with her and left me in the house as police officers questioned me, but there was nothing for me to say. I was shocked. Soon after, they let me go to the hospital and I asked where my daughter was. They told me that they took Jessica into surgery because, as you can probably guess by now, she was the victim of something horrific. Someone broke her from the inside and out. My legs weakened and I fell to the floor crying uncontrollably. I knew it was my fault. The nurses came and helped me into a room where Robert was waiting. He looked at me and asked with his face strained, "You didn't take Jessica to school, did you?" I stood quiet. I couldn't even speak, only cry. He then began yelling at me. He said, "You didn't take her to school, and this is what happened to her." I started crying even harder while nodding. I expected him to hit me, since I deserved it. But he didn't let me feel guilty. He left guilt consume me more than it already had. Several hours later, the doctor came, saying everything went fine, but she had lost a lot of blood and had suffered brain trauma, and that she wouldn't be able to have children in the future. Since they had to take out her reproductive organs, they were in that bad of a condition. Robert looks at me, stands up, and walks away. The doctors tried to stop him, since he wasn't in the right state of mind to go, but he still left. 8 days after, Jessica is at home and won't let me help her bathe or even touch her. Her smiles, her happiness, and her childhood have all been taken away from me, and I'm to blame. The day after, Robert goes to Walmart to buy groceries. He spots the 2 men who left the house along with 3 other people, and as he got close, he heard them say that they did that to our daughter. That they took turns doing it. That Robert was an idiot, and he wouldn't even figure out it was them. Robert got angry, but he bought the groceries, and as he went out he saw the men and acted as if nothing had happened. They greeted each other normally, and Robert smiled and went to his car and cried. He couldn't believe that people he helped would do something so horrifying to a child after he trusted them. So he went home, and with the groceries went to the master bedroom and left again. He himself said in court that he waited until dark, took the 2 firearms he owned, and went on a motorcycle, and finished their lives. He went to the police and confessed what he had done. They put him in prison, and it didn't take long for him to go to court. The evidence was in his favor, since they found that what was inside our daughter belonged to the men. He confessed as guilty and explained why he did it, and apologized to the mothers of the 2 men, saying that their sons were disgusting after he helped them, that they hurt his daughter, and now she's traumatized, will never look at life the same, has lost her innocence and will never be able to have children. And that if he had to, he would do it again. One of the mothers forgave them since she would have done the same thing, and she accepted her son was no angel, and after he had done something so horrible to a child, while the other woman never forgave him. This is the end of Veronica's perspective. Robert was sentenced to 10 years in jail but got out after 4 for good behavior, when in truth the judge was a good friend, who on the second case did cut his jail term short. Throughout those years, Jessica and her mother had been going to family therapy, and a psychologist and I have been trying to help them. Jessica, now 12, has improved a bit, but is still scared of the outside world. She enjoys the time with me more than with her mother, and she's still seeing a therapist but hates to talk about what happened that day as it's drilled into her mind. From my perspective, he doesn't deserve that time in jail, but who am I to judge? I would do the same if someone were to hurt a child of mine. This just goes to show that no matter how kind someone is to someone else, they might not receive the same treatment, and that in the end, we don't know who to trust. Have a good day, and be aware of your surroundings. I have a number of stories about my time in the armed forces. This one is from basic training, Fort Benning. Just got back a few months ago. We had this one private who was getting medically discharged due to some physical defect, despite being ripped out of his mind. This little dude was on his way out, but if anyone here has ever gotten discharged from basic, you know it's a long process. So one night, we got messed up pretty hard by our drill sergeant, who will hereby be referred to as DS. So DS was a master mind messer, and that's exactly what he did to us that night. He finally called it a night and let us go to sleep. Well, Private Crazy is still all pissed. I mean, he's leaving, why does he have to get so messed up? So he's pissed and walks around after lights out. So one of the privates in the bunk next to him, a private well known to be an unapologetic ass, tells him to shut the hell up. So Private Crazy kicks this other guy's bed, and that guy responds with, "Wow, you're a hard ass." And after that, Private Crazy says he doesn't remember a thing. Private Crazy starts walking around the kill zone. He goes over to the workout area and starts lifting. People ignore it, whatever, he's just blowing off steam. Then he does a tribal war dance. He was of Islander descent, and now people are telling him to be quiet. Then, barefooted, he walks back into the kill zone and up to one of the pillars. He starts kicking the pillar until his foot is bleeding. Now people are just like, what are you doing? After he's done proving the point he had with the pillar, he sits down in the center of the room with 50 men. He just sits down, and guess whose bunk he's staring at? Private Ass. Private Crazy starts saying in a high pitch and unnatural tone the private's last name, and says, 8 minutes. Everyone starts panicking. Private Crazy get up, suddenly cuts himself on some rope that we keep in the bay for a wider range of reasons, goes back to the other private's bed and starts staring at him until he's shouting in unnatural voices. Out of nowhere, Private Crazy jumped out the window. A bunch of guys stopped him and started dragging him to DS's office. He comes out and asks what the hell is going on. Well, the only answer is that Private Crazy threw his entire jar of marbles off a bridge. He calls the military police, and it takes 6 men, all whom are bigger than Private Crazy, to take him downstairs. Once they're down, he got loose, but luckily Private Biceps, one of the biggest guys in the platoon, came down to tackle him. The entire time he's yelling the original guy's name. So when the military police show up and slap the cuffs on, he blinks and bam, back to normal. He had no idea what happened. Mind you, that's only the first story. This story messed me up. It didn't happen in my platoon's bay, and I don't remember which platoon it did happen to, but the only thing I remember from this story is that the only 2 witnesses to it were literally frozen with fear, so much so they couldn't move or speak. 2 guys were laying in a bed on the top bunks, and neither could fall asleep. Fireguard was sitting at the desk talking and laughing. Their DS must not have been on the CQ that night, so they were looking around the bay when they both saw it. How they both described it was that it was almost amorphous. This thing, except with a weird arm, with claws, but looked like some sort of shadow death creature. It didn't look solid, but they could also tell it wasn't entirely incorporeal. They watched it as it slowly pulled itself onto the lockers across the room with its single long arm, inch forward onto the lockers, and then let itself fall to the ground, and then repeat this on the next locker and the next, but it was silent as it did so. These 2 privates were damn near crapping themselves, and eventually it just disappeared. In a comedic note, another platoon, who was seeing this too, asked their DS what the deal was. His response was, "Well, I guess it's haunted." Finally, this is a Fireguard story. 2 of my buddies are on Fireguard, and they're making their rounds. Well, this one guy literally took a half hour in the bathroom. After the guy in the bathroom finishes up, he steps out of the stall and he sees his partner for the shift. He freezes, and I mean it's kind of awkward since he's just done doing what he's doing, so he assumed he heard when things got weird. So slowly, with shame, he says the guy's name to no response. The first guy asks the second what he's doing in there. Well, I guess that shook him, so he comes and says, "Oh, I saw something in the kill zone, so I came here to wait for you." He's freaked out and asks him to explain. So he says, "Well, I was watching the door, but when I looked in the kill zone, I saw these kids playing there." So they checked and it was clear, but from that point they didn't make rounds around the kill zone. They just stayed at the desk. But as they were walking back to the front, the first private looks out the window to one of the balconies outside where the chairs and such were for when the DSs need a break. He looked out and thought he saw someone sitting in a chair. He walked over to the window to make sure it was a DS, but then realized there was no one there. My stepfather is a truck driver. Anyone who's familiar with the 401 highway in Ontario knows how crap it can be in winter. He was heading to Ottawa after a pickup in Toronto, and just before Kingston, another truck had jackknifed about 10 minutes past Kingston. When the truck jackknifed, it slid into the barrier and rolled. The traffic was moving, but pretty heavy. The cars behind the truck didn't have time to stop, and 14 or 15 vans and pickups ran into the initial crash at speed. My stepfather was a few vehicles behind, but saw the initial crash and hit his air brakes for all he was worth. Luckily, he had the length to get it to stop, and his load was heavy, but not enough force in order to keep the truck rolling. About 10 to 15 minutes go by. First responders are on the scene inspecting the crash and working out how to start getting to the victims still trapped. My stepfather has always stressed one specific detail about vehicle safety in the event of a situation such as this. Stay in the car unless there is immediate danger in there with you, or you can see someone in urgent need. Wait for the first responder to come to you, unless you're injured and have a clear path away from the road. So he's idling his truck about 10 meters back from the crash itself, and he sees a woman whose car is about midway in the pileup slowly open the door and kind of stagger out her mangled car. She looks disoriented and is clearly moving like she's confused and doesn't know what's happening. He has an "oh crap" moment and opens the door about to run and get her. She's staggering towards the median, not the shoulder, and he's worried about how she's going to wander into the oncoming other side of the highway. As she's stepping out onto the running boards, he hears an air horn pulled repeatedly. He jumps back in and pulls his door closed behind him, as another transport comes straight onto the wreck. The guy hit more than black ice, and the weight of his load and momentum carried the truck forward toward the median. The woman had made it to a point where she was between the truck and the median. My stepfather watched a woman, who he'd been about to run out to and pull from the road, get cut in half. I was doing guard duty in the army one night. We had some training exercise in an abandoned camp facility, and my buddy and I had been assigned to watch over some vehicles that we had parked in a large empty warehouse. We were the only ones in the camp facility, as there was nothing else valuable that had to be watched overnight. My buddy and I had tied hammocks between the vehicles to get a bit more comfortable for the overnight watch, when we suddenly saw a pack of wild dogs standing outside the doors to the warehouse. Now, these doors were wide open, and nothing was stopping the dogs from coming in at all, but they just stood there. 15 to 20 dogs lined up at the entrance to the abandoned warehouse, watching us. Suddenly, as if someone had flipped a switch, they all started barking and howling in our direction. I say our direction because when I discussed it later with him, we both agreed that it felt like the dogs were barking at something else in the entirely abandoned warehouse. My buddy and I were completely terrified. First, that we might have gotten swarmed by dogs, and second, whatever those dogs were barking at. We started to radio for help, but suddenly the pack of dogs stopped barking and left. It was as if they were never there. That was a long night of guard duty, I can tell you.